Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The magical universe of Harry Potter seems meticulously crafted, but look a little closer and you'll notice that some questions were never truly answered, especially when it comes to Muggleborn witches and wizards, those born into non-magical families, yet gifted with the power of magic. Where does their magic come from? What happens if they don't want to attend Hogwarts? And why does no one seem to seriously explore their nature? Let's talk about all of this right now. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Where does a Muggle child get magic? One of the most puzzling mysteries. How does an ordinary child from a non-magical family suddenly become a wizard? In 2007, Rowling mentioned that Muggleborns supposedly had a magical ancestor many generations ago, and that the gene had just resurfaced. But that theory feels shaky at best. Does this mean all Muggleborns are secretly distant cousins? And what about the Creevey brothers? Both of them turned out magical. We never get a clear explanation in the books. And that's not just a fun trivia gap. It's a fundamental piece of the puzzle when it comes to how magic itself works. Number 2. Why don't wizards care about the origin of Muggleborns? Rowling openly condemns blood purity ideology and Voldemort's idea that Muggleborns are stealing magic. But oddly enough, the magical world itself doesn't seem very eager to figure out where these so-called thieves come from. No studies, no research, no real curiosity about how magical ability appears in Muggle children. It's as if the entire subject is avoided. Is it because the truth might be inconvenient, or because the magical elite simply doesn't want to disrupt the worldview they've grown used to? Number 3. How do Muggleborns learn the ways of the magical world? Imagine being a regular kid who suddenly gets a Hogwarts letter. At 11, you're thrown into a completely foreign world where everything from food to education runs on magic. Harry Potter was lucky. He had Hagrid, Ron, and plenty of support. But what about the others? Who explains what a squib is or what a poltergeist does? How wizarding laws work and what's forbidden? Where's their magical orientation course? From what we see in the books, there isn't one. You either figure it out yourself or stumble through and hope for the best. Number 4, what if the child doesn't want to go to Hogwarts? Now flip the situation. What if the child simply doesn't want to go? Maybe they have friends, a life, a dream of becoming an architect or a computer programmer. Then owls start arriving, strange letters appear, and mysterious adults start knocking on the door. What happens in these cases? Are kids forced to attend? Are refusals allowed? Rowling never covers this, but it raises a question. How voluntary is education at Hogwarts really? Is the child's opinion considered, or does the system work on a "you got the letter, pack your bags" basis? Number 5. What if the parents are against Hogwarts and magic in general? We've seen how the Dursleys absolutely hated magic, but surely they aren't the only ones. There must be other parents who view magic with fear, mistrust, or simply don't want their child whisked away to some secretive boarding school full of strange creatures and even stranger teachers. What then? Do they have a say, or does the Ministry of Magic just politely insist? Rowling doesn't show us this, but the absence feels unsettling. Can the magical world really ignore a parent's will just because their child was born with magical talent? Number 6. Do all Muggleborns agree to live in the wizarding world? And finally, say the child does attend Hogwarts and finishes their education. What happens next? They're expected to choose a magical career and live fully within the wizarding world. But what if they want to return to the Muggle life? What if they want to become a doctor, an engineer, or a musician? Is that even possible? Does a magical education hinder reintegration into Muggle society? How do they explain the 7-year gap in their schooling? Will the Muggle world even accept them? A 17-year-old Hogwarts graduate might be left without a diploma, without real-world job experience, and often without support. It's a delicate, rarely explored issue that never made it into the books. Number 7. How do Muggleborns explain their disappearance to Muggle friends? Before Hogwarts, Hermione Granger must have had Muggle friends, girls she sat with at lunch, a neighbour she rode bikes with, maybe even a best friend she shared secrets with. Then one day, gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. In the Philosopher's Stone, she arrives on the train already fully aware of her new life, but no one ever asks what story she told the world she left behind. Did she say she got into a boarding school, one with no phones, no visits, no return until June? And did her friend believe her? The statute of secrecy forbids revealing magic. So what happens when that friend starts asking questions, when letters go unanswered, when the seat beside them in class stays empty year after year? Does the ministry send obliviators to wipe away every trace? Or do Muggleborns just learn early how to lie? "I'm not allowed to talk about it" might become the new default. But lies have weight. They press on a child's shoulders. The books never show us the moment Hermione had to turn her back on someone who didn't understand, but that moment must have happened, and it must have hurt. Number 8. How do Muggleborn parents stay involved after Hogwarts? Hermione's parents saw Diagon Alley once. They bought her books, a wand, maybe an owl. Then they vanished from the story, like Muggles often do. They didn't attend Hogwarts events. They never visited during term. We never saw a parent-teacher meeting, never heard Dumbledore send them an owl to say, "Your daughter fought a troll today, but she's fine." When Hermione was petrified in the Chamber of Secrets, no mention was made of contacting her family. Just silence, a daughter in danger, and 2 Muggle parents kept in the dark. There are no phones at Hogwarts, no letters unless you own an owl or borrow one, no weekend visits. It's as if the school is a closed world and the price of magic is distance. What happens to the bond between parent and child when it's stretched by secrets? Does a mother feel it when her son casts his first spell? Can a father understand his daughter's fear of a name no Muggle has ever heard? The books don't say, but for every Hermione there's a family left behind, proud, confused, and completely alone. Number 9. How do Muggleborns adjust to returning home for holidays? Hermione Granger went home for the holidays. She sat at a dinner table with her parents, who worked as dentists and believed in science, not spells. Just weeks before, she had been dueling trolls, attending classes taught by ghosts, and watching Quidditch matches from broomstick stands. And yet, at home, she had to pretend it was all normal. "I've got loads of homework," she once said, in The Philosopher's Stone, brushing past the truth. But how do you talk about transfiguration when your parents expect math? Imagine Dean Thomas returning to his Muggle neighbourhood after a year in Gryffindor Tower. His friends play football. They talk about music, films, and school drama. Dean listens, but he's seen things they wouldn't believe. A dragon in the Triwizard Tournament. A flying car. He can't tell them any of it. Not a single word. "It's classified," he might joke. But really, it's lonely. Every conversation becomes a minefield, every laugh, a reminder of what he has to hide. There are no guides for this transition, no advice from Hogwarts about what to say when your aunt asks about school. No support groups, no magical psychologist helping you deal with 2 versions of reality. The return from the magical world isn't gentle, it's sudden, sharp. One moment you're casting Lumos, the next you're fumbling with a light switch. The books never ask, what happens to a young wizard's heart when it's split between 2 worlds? Maybe because the answer isn't magical at all. It's painful. Number 10. Is there any support system for Muggleborns after graduation? Dean Thomas graduated from Hogwarts with no magical family to return to. His Muggle mother didn't understand the world he now belonged to. His father, a wizard, had died without ever telling them who he really was. After the war, Dean didn't talk about his job prospects or his future. He just disappeared into the background of the story. But what happened to him next? Where did he live? Who helped him find work? No one in the book says. And that silence says everything. Purebloods like Percy Weasley walked straight into ministry internships. Even half-bloods like Tonks had aura connections through family. But Muggleborns, no home in Diagon Alley, no relatives with contacts, no Gringotts vault, passed down for rent and robes. They leave school with a wand and a certificate, and little else. "It's not much," Hagrid once said about the cottage he gave Harry, but to a Muggle born fresh out of Hogwarts, even that would mean everything. The books never mention a single mentorship program, No housing for students starting out, no magical job centre, not even an office at the ministry that guides Muggleborn graduates. If Hermione hadn't joined the resistance, would she have been left on her own too? We love to believe the world of witches and wizards is full of wonder, but for those born outside its gates it can also be cold, quietly unforgiving, and not nearly magical enough. Number 11, are there subtle forms of discrimination against Muggleborns? When Draco Malfoy called Hermione a filthy little mudblood in the Chamber of Secrets, the word cut deeper than a curse. It wasn't just a childish insult, it was a reflection of a belief still whispered in some wizarding households. Hermione stood up to it. She became top of her class, she helped save the world, but even then some purebloods saw her as less. Not because of her skill, but because of her blood. Discrimination doesn't always wear a black cloak or scream unforgivable curses. Sometimes it looks like a job never offered, a promotion that never comes. A quiet whisper. We prefer someone with a more traditional background. Terry Boot once mentioned how his father didn't want him associating with ministry types with no family name. He didn't mean Muggleborns directly, but everyone understood. Muggleborns, even the brightest, enter adulthood with no family connections, no magical heritage, no vaults at Gringotts. They have to build everything from nothing. That alone makes the climb steeper. After the war, Kingsley Shacklebolt promised change, but change takes time, and silence hides more than screams. Has the prejudice truly vanished or just gone underground? When a Muggleborn applies to be a department head at the ministry, does the old blood still whisper behind closed doors? We like to believe the wizarding world became better, but maybe it just became quieter. Number 12. How are Muggleborns protected from dark wizard attacks? During the Second Wizarding War, the rules collapsed. Muggleborns weren't just in danger, they were hunted. The Ministry, under Voldemort's control, created the Muggleborn Registration Commission. Those without magical lineage were accused of stealing magic. They were interrogated, humiliated, stripped of their wands. Hermione Granger herself would have been a target, if not for running. "We're on the run now," she told Harry and Ron in the Deathly Hallows. Not because they wanted to be, but because the system had turned against her kind. Mary Cattermole is a name many forget. She stood trial in a dark chamber beneath the ministry, accused only of being Muggleborn. No crimes, no rebellion, just birth. Her husband, Reginald, worked maintenance at the ministry. He couldn't help her. Harry, disguised under Polyjuice Potion, saved her at the last moment. But what if he hadn't? No auras came, no magical shelter existed for her. In a world of spells, no one had built a safe place for people like her. There were no evacuation plans, no protective networks for Muggleborns. The Order of the Phoenix tried to help, but they were underground, outnumbered, and constantly watched. "The ministry has fallen," Kingsley Shacklebolt warned during Bill and Fleur's wedding. When it fell on the Muggleborns first. They had no ancestral homes with ancient enchantments, no family vaults, no safe houses hidden by Fidelius charms. They had front doors, phone lines, and parents who had no idea what a dark mark meant. So what now? What if it happens again? The books end with Voldemort's defeat, but history repeats itself. Has the wizarding world prepared? Are there now safe houses for Muggleborn families, emergency alerts, protection spells taught in first year? Or will the next Mary Cattermole face the same cold courtroom, alone, wandless, praying someone like Harry comes in time? Number 13. Can Muggleborns use magic outside of school? When Harry Potter accidentally inflated Aunt Marge in The Prisoner of Azkaban, he feared immediate expulsion from Hogwarts. The law was clear. Underage magic outside school was strictly forbidden. But what if Harry had been born to Muggle parents, with no one to cover for him or explain his situation? Imagine being 11, discovering you're a wizard, and then being told you can't use any magic at all, especially when your home is filled with people who don't understand your new life. For Muggleborn students, this rule isn't just inconvenient, it's isolating. Take Justin Finch Fletchley as an example. A Muggleborn sorted into Hufflepuff, he came from a family that had prepared him for Eton before Hogwarts redirected his fate. Returning home for the summer, Justin couldn't even show his parents the most basic spell to prove what he was learning. Meanwhile, someone like Draco Malfoy spent his break casually practicing hexes in the family drawing room. "Father showed me this new curse," Draco once boasted in the common room. "It can make someone's teeth grow through their nose." The Ministry can't track magic in magical homes, so purebloods have a silent advantage. Even Hermione Granger, one of the most gifted students in Hogwarts history, had to endure summers without practice. She mentioned once, frustrated, "I've read all the theory, but I can't try anything." She returned every September in top form, not because she practiced, but because she was brilliant. But not every Muggleborn has Hermione's brain. Some need time, trial and error to improve, and without magical parents, they're denied even that. The law pretends to be equal, but it isn't. Muggleborns are expected to learn in a vacuum under threat of punishment, while others break the rules behind enchanted curtains. In truth, it's not a law, it's a wall, one that divides those who grow up with magic from those who must stumble in the dark. Number 14. What if a Muggleborn doesn't show magic by age 11? Of all the mysteries in the magical world, one of the most quietly tragic may be the question of what becomes of a Muggleborn child who never manifests magic, at least not by the time the clock strikes their 11th birthday. Most witches and wizards assume magic appears early, sparked by a rush of emotion, fear, rage, or longing. "Happens to all of us at some point," Hagrid once told Harry, reminiscing about his own clumsy childhood. But what if magic doesn't manifest early? What if it lingers, sleeping, waiting for a moment that never comes? Take the case of Nicholas Ward. Born in 1977 to two teachers in Sussex, Nicholas grew up in a quiet, book-filled home where conflicts were discussed in calm voices and needs were gently met. His mother, Marjorie, believed in reason over punishment, and his father, Alan, nurtured every question with a walk to the local library. Nicholas never fell down a staircase in terror, never faced a bully on the playground. His world was serene, buffered from chaos, and so magic had no reason to stir. At the age of 11, while other magical children were receiving their Hogwarts letters, delivered by owls who knew precisely where to find them, Nicholas's life moved forward without interruption. His parents bought him a new bicycle for his birthday. He was accepted into a grammar school. No quills danced of their own accord. No glass vanished at the zoo. The letter from Hogwarts never came. This isn't to say Nicholas wasn't magical. Deep within him lay the same dormant spark that had ignited the accidental sorcery of Hermione Granger when she repaired a broken toy, or Lily Evans when she made a flower bloom out of season. But Nicholas's life lacked the catalyst. His childhood had never tested the boundaries where magic might fight to surface. In most wizarding circles, it is believed that the trace, an enchantment set upon underage witches and wizards, alerts the Ministry of accidental magic in Muggleborns. But what happens if that magic never erupts? The Ministry does not test for magical potential. It waits for signs, and in the absence of signs, silence prevails. There are whisperings in the Department of Magical Education, notes filed away in quiet drawers behind thicker folders of Hogwarts admissions. They call it the dormant file. Names of children born to Muggles with no magical incidents reported, yet born during periods of heightened magical resonance. These are the maybes, the almosts. Children who might have been witches or wizards if life had provoked them enough. If only a dog had chased them into a hedge. If only a window had slammed too hard. Professor Vector, a quiet voice among the Hogwarts staff, once suggested that the Ministry fund a system of magical aptitude evaluations for Muggleborn children. Just as squibs are sometimes tested and tracked, she noted in an internal memo, we ought to examine the shadows in reverse, those who never spark but glow faintly in the right conditions. Her idea was filed away under budgetary impracticalities. There is a tragic irony to this. A magical child born into a tumultuous household, a place with anger, fear, and emotional stress, may accidentally explode a teacup or set fire to curtains, triggering the ministry's attention. But a child born into peace may never have the chance to express what lies within them. In this way, serenity becomes a kind of silencer. The gentle are forgotten. In 1994, Nicholas Ward was 20 years old. He had become a musician, playing cello in the evenings, working in a local bookstore by day. One night, during a thunderstorm, he was alone in the shop when lightning cut the power. He reached for a candle, flicked his fingers in frustration, and it burst into flame. No lighter, no matches, just heat and sudden fire. It startled him, but he dismissed it as static or coincidence. Over the next few weeks, other strange things happened. Books fell from shelves without being touched. A kettle whistled without heat. And still Nicholas never suspected. He had no context for magic, no one to tell him that what he was experiencing was something more. Had someone like Minerva McGonagall found him at 11, Nicholas might have sat in her transfiguration class. He might have excelled at charms, wept over a failed potion, won house points for Ravenclaw. Instead, his spark flickered in silence, unknown even to himself. This is not an isolated incident. The wizarding world does not like to speak of the lost ones. It disrupts the illusion of order, the belief that every child destined for magic is found in time. But magic is not a bureaucracy. It does not keep calendars. It does not thrive on deadlines. There are those who believe the Hogwarts quill, said to record the name of every magical child at birth, misses some. The truth, of course, is more complicated. The quill, enchanted by Isolde Serre herself and modified by generations of schoolmasters, only records those whose magic has sparked, however subtly. It listens not for names, but for echoes. No echo, no entry. Imagine, then, a child like Emma Carlyle, born in 1989 in a small village in Wales. Her childhood was wrapped in the scent of lavender and soft jazz. She never raised her voice, never saw a fight. But at 12, while hiking with her father, she slipped on wet moss and tumbled down a ridge. She should have broken her leg, but instead she floated, just long enough to land safely. Emma's case was reported by a squib relative, a great-aunt, who, spotting the impossible descent, contacted an old friend at St. Mungo's. Emma received her Hogwarts letter a full year late. She joined as a second year, bewildered but eager. The sorting hat, when placed upon her head, murmured only one word: late. But how many others never fall down that ridge? How many simply live quietly, their spark buried under the weight of normalcy? There is no formal search team, no magical census. The ministry does not knock on doors to investigate every Muggle-born infant. The system, as it stands, is passive. It watches, it waits, it reacts. Number 15. Why don't Muggle-borns try to teach magic to Muggles? One of the most hauntingly unexplored ideas in the entire wizarding world is the absence of any serious bridge between the magical and non-magical realms. A bridge that could have been constructed not by purebloods or half-bloods, but by the very children of the non-magical world, the Muggleborns. Why, one might ask, has no Muggle-born witch or wizard, not even the brilliant Hermione Granger, taken it upon themselves to educate Muggles about the magical realm? The question stretches far beyond idle speculation. It strikes at the heart of a cultural and ethical silence that pervades wizarding society. Muggleborns, like Hermione, Dean Thomas or Lily Evans before them, are the only witches and wizards who grow up fully within the Muggle world, and they understand it, its logic, its customs, its fears and dreams. When they enter the wizarding world, they do so as outsiders, peering into a hidden universe of wands and potions with the wide-eyed wonder of someone discovering Narnia through a wardrobe. But what happens to their knowledge of the Muggle world once they're drawn into Hogwarts? More crucially, why does that connection seem to wither and die? Hermione Granger stands as the most obvious counterfactual. A girl of unmatched intellect, moral clarity, and fierce loyalty to justice, she fought for house elf rights and the fair treatment of magical creatures. She read more books than most students at Hogwarts combined and mastered complex spells with ease. Yet, after the war, even she did not initiate a campaign to introduce magic, safely, slowly, intellectually, to the Muggle population. Why? It's not as if Hermione forgot her roots. Her decision to modify her parents' memories in order to protect them during the Second Wizarding War showed how deeply she still loved and respected the Muggle world. She even reversed the spell and returned to them. But love does not always equate to transformation. After the war, Hermione joined the Ministry of Magic. She worked on progressive legislation, yes, but within the confines of the magical world. The world of her youth, her Muggle background, became a protected compartment, not a launching pad for revolution. Perhaps the answer lies in the psychological transformation every Muggleborn undergoes. At the age of 11, they are taken from their world and introduced to another where they are exceptional, not only magical, but rare. They become novelties, subjects of fascination, envy, and sometimes disdain. From the very first day at Hogwarts, the message is clear. Magic is not only secret, it is sacred. The Statute of Secrecy, created in 1692, still looms like an unshakable pillar. To break it is to risk everything: exile, punishment, obliviation. But isn't it strange that no one even tries to reform this statute? That no Muggleborn who once thought themselves destined for nothing more than a suburban life of math exams and shopping malls has ever asked the one radical question: what if the world should know? The Statute of Secrecy is draconian. It treats Muggles as fragile, panicky beings incapable of grasping magic without descending into chaos. But who better than Muggleborns to prove otherwise? And yet the silence persists. There are no known attempts, no pamphlets, no manifestos, no hidden movements to bring magic into the open, even in a limited, educational way. This is not merely absence, it is erasure. Consider Lily Evans, mother of Harry Potter. Intelligent, kind, and brave, she married a pureblood and fought Voldemort until her death. Her sister, Petunia, was a Muggle, a bitter, jealous one, yes, but still a representative of that other world Lily came from. Why didn't Lily, even privately, leave behind some sort of legacy to explain magic to the non-magical? A book, a diary, a spell-infused letter? The answer may lie in fear of rejection, of danger, of the Ministry's brutal enforcement. And yet, others did leave behind dangerous knowledge. Dumbledore's notes, Grindelwald's speeches, even Voldemort's Horcruxes, all encoded, yes, but real. The absence of even one Muggle-born voice calling out from the shadows suggests something deeper than obedience. It suggests assimilation. Assimilation is a powerful force. Once a Muggle-born child enters Hogwarts, they are encouraged, subtly, then overtly, to become fully magical. They adopt new vocabulary, new clothing, new rules of logic. The very idea of electricity becomes a joke, a quaint curiosity. The Muggle world begins to feel backward. The trouble is, the Muggles can't see us, Arthur Weasley once mused, can't understand how wonderful we are. This sentiment is not unusual, it is foundational. It tells Muggleborns, softly but repeatedly, you are better now. And over time, most believe it. Even in moments when the magical world could have used the Muggle perspective to survive, it failed to listen. During the rise of Voldemort, the Muggle government was kept in the dark, even though their own citizens were dying. Prime Minister Fudge met with the British Muggle Prime Minister only in times of crisis. Never partnership. No collaboration, no bridge. Imagine if Dean Thomas, raised in a loving Muggle home and denied knowledge of his wizard father, had grown up to create a school, not for magical training but magical understanding, a place where Muggles could learn about wizarding culture, history, even theory. No wands, no spells, just knowledge, a sort of anthropological embassy of magic. Would the Ministry have shut it down? Would he have been tried for treason? Even magical inventions that could benefit the Muggle world are hoarded. Extendable bags, self-cleaning cauldrons, magical healing potions. None are shared. When Arthur Weasley is fascinated by a rubber duck, we laugh. But when a child dies in a Muggle hospital of an illness Madame Pomfrey could cure in an afternoon, who laughs then? The ethical implications are staggering. Wizards watch Muggles suffer, starve, and die, knowing they could help but don't. The justification is always the same: exposure, risks, panic. But panic is born of ignorance, and ignorance exists because the bridge remains unbuilt. Even the Hogwarts curriculum supports this segregation. Muggle studies, a class that should be a diplomatic cornerstone, is a joke. Taught by wizards who often misunderstand the very world they're discussing, it fails to prepare magical children for real interaction. Imagine the reverse: a class at a Muggle university taught by someone who never lived a day in the magical world. The outrage would be swift. Number 16. Why isn't there a special educational program for Muggleborns? A young girl named Hermione Granger received her Hogwarts letter on a summer morning, much like many others before her. Her parents, Muggle dentists, stared at the parchment in disbelief. The owl, still perched awkwardly on their windowsill, blinked as if it too knew how strange this moment was. Hermione, though brilliant beyond her years, had never so much as seen a cauldron outside of a Halloween display, let alone brewed a potion or waved a wand. And yet she was to join a school filled with children whose lullabies were tales of Merlin, whose parents had taught them to recognize the hum of a wand's core before they could spell their names. There was no bridge between her world and theirs, just the abrupt crossing of Platform 9 and 3/4. The wizarding world, as presented in Hogwarts, prides itself on unity. Yet in practice, this unity presupposes an inherited familiarity with magic. The moment a Muggleborn crosses the threshold of the castle, they are expected to keep pace with peers who have grown up watching their siblings levitate chairs or turn beetles into buttons for fun. There is no mention in the books of a 0 year, no summer course, no magical orientation week. As if understanding galleons, unicorns, and the principles of arithmancy could come as easily as unpacking a trunk. One might argue that Hogwarts provides everything a student needs, yet the assumption that a single textbook can replace years of cultural immersion is not only naive, it is unfair. Consider how Harry Potter himself, though not Muggle-born, entered the magical world nearly as ignorant. In his case, he had Hagrid, a guide who, awkward as he was, served as a buffer between worlds. He explained what Gringotts was, brought Harry's wand with him, and introduced him to the wizarding marketplace. But not every Muggleborn has a Hagrid. Hermione's brilliance helped her overcome the gap, but even she admitted early on that she had learned all our course books by heart. It wasn't curiosity alone that drove her, it was necessity. While other children arrived at Hogwarts with intuitive knowledge of the magical world, she had to memorize it like a foreign language. Imagine a child arriving at school and not knowing the difference between a ghost and a poltergeist, or being mocked by a portrait for not bowing before entering a headmaster's office. Magical etiquette is not written in any syllabus, yet it governs daily life at Hogwarts. And then there is the matter of the wand. The books state that the wand chooses the wizard, but who prepares the wizard to understand what that truly means? A Muggle-born child may walk into Ollivander's and marvel at the stacks of boxes, but does she grasp the gravity of what lies within? For her, the wand is not an heirloom or a symbol of lineage. It is a foreign instrument that she must somehow master on instinct alone. And what of magical creatures, curses, and unspoken taboos? Who explains that centaurs do not take kindly to humans, or that house elves are not to be gifted clothing without consequence? The Ministry of Magic, for all its bureaucratic weight, has no program for magical integration. Surely it would be a matter of public safety to ensure that Muggleborns understand the consequences of accidental magic, the responsibilities of spellcasting, and the laws of magical secrecy. We learn in The Chamber of Secrets that misuse of magic by underage wizards is strictly monitored, but not that anyone ensures they know how not to misuse it. Take the example of Dean Thomas. A Muggle-born Gryffindor, he entered Hogwarts without even knowing he was a wizard. His father, a wizard who had died without revealing his identity, left Dean to grow up entirely in the Muggle world. When he received his Hogwarts letter, there was no mention of how his life was about to turn upside down. No orientation, no magical history course to fill in the cultural gaps, just robes, books, and a very steep learning curve. It's a wonder he managed to integrate as smoothly as he did. The lack of a preparatory program becomes even more glaring when compared to how carefully pure blood traditions are preserved. Families like the Malfoys ensure their children know Latin spell etymology, historical wizarding events, and wand lore long before setting foot in the Great Hall. Draco Malfoy, upon meeting Harry, immediately ridicules Hagrid and Ron Weasley, invoking social hierarchies Harry hasn't even learned exist. How could a Muggle-born child hope to navigate this environment with confidence? And let us not forget the emotional toll. The sense of being an outsider is not mitigated by simply receiving an acceptance letter. Imagine being 11, pulled from one world and thrust into another, where staircases move, ghosts argue, and classmates speak in slang you don't understand. No one explains what it means to be a Hufflepuff, how to address a professor properly, or why it's unwise to wander the Forbidden Forest. Even the food, treacle tart, pumpkin juice, cauldron cakes, is foreign. There's no magical welcome packet, no mentorship initiative. Perhaps the most profound silence lies in the lack of cultural orientation. Wizards have their own sports, legends, and even holidays. How does a Muggle-born child learn that Merlin was real, or why everyone seems to fear the name Voldemort? The books make it clear that even wizard-raised children don't say his name, but no one explains that to a Muggle-born. It's assumed, and when the assumption breaks, it's the Muggle-born who is embarrassed or endangered. Luna Lovegood, though not Muggle-born, shows how ostracization can take root in ignorance. Her beliefs, odd to many, still stem from magical lineage. Imagine then how a child who doesn't even know what a thestral is might feel seeing one for the first time. How can we ask children to fight off boggarts, dual classmates, and ride hippogriffs without first teaching them what those things are? In The Philosopher's Stone, Professor McGonagall speaks of transfiguration with authority and awe, but never stops to ask who in the class might be encountering the word for the first time. Number 17. Why doesn't the Ministry cooperate with Muggle institutions? When a child suddenly disappears from the educational system, alarm bells ring, teachers report it, social workers get involved, police inquiries follow. But in the world of Harry Potter, dozens of children vanish from the Muggle system every year, magical children born to non-magical parents, and no one asks a single question. No reports are filed, no missing person cases opened. These children simply vanish, only to reappear years later with forged academic credentials, strange gaps in medical history, and no traceable record of where they've been. The question that looms, unanswered and unsettling, is why doesn't the Ministry of Magic cooperate with Muggle institutions, even undercover? The Ministry has departments for everything: a department of magical accidents and catastrophes, an improper use of magic office, a department of international magical cooperation. Yet it has no department, none at all, for managing long-term Muggle relations concerning magical children. Instead, they rely on memory charms, secrecy, and a hope that no one notices the cracks, but the cracks are widening. If the Ministry had been paying attention, it would have noticed this decades ago. The story of Hermione Granger is one of the clearest examples. A brilliant young girl from a Muggle family, she would have been a top student in any school system. One day, she simply vanishes from the Muggle primary school system. No explanation, no transfer paperwork, no psychological evaluations. Her teachers, who might have cared deeply, are left without answers. How was this covered? Did a Ministry obliviator modify the memories of every staff member she had encountered, her classmates, their parents, the school records? The answer lies in a dangerous assumption the Ministry clings to, that Muggles are too distracted, too fragmented, too forgetful to notice a child's disappearance. The statute of secrecy must be maintained at all costs, they say, but maintaining secrecy at the cost of humanity, that's a trade-off that's starting to show its moral rot. In Order of the Phoenix, Arthur Weasley is astonished by Muggle transportation, fascinated by escalators and tube stations. Yet when he talks about his job in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, it's clear how little understanding even well-meaning Ministry officials have of Muggle systems. One might imagine a small unit within the ministry tasked with creating false records, a forged school transfer here, a medical excuse there. But no such division exists, at least not officially. If it does, it's operating in complete secrecy, without oversight, and in direct contradiction to the ministry's public policies. This suggests an even darker truth. The ministry isn't interested in cooperation, it's interested in control. Consider the case of Colin Creevey. His disappearance from the Muggle world was abrupt. A boy obsessed with cameras, he would have been known in his neighbourhood. After being petrified in his second year, no Muggle hospital was informed. No inquiries were made by social services about his sudden medical condition or absence from life entirely. Did his parents even know how he was being treated? Or were they handed a few vague reassurances and a pat on the head by someone from the Obliviator squad? There's an eerie silence surrounding these transitions. The letter from Hogwarts arrives, and with it, a lifetime of secrets. Parents are encouraged to accept, without question, the removal of their child from the Muggle world. No handbook, no Muggle liaison officer to guide them, just a train ticket, a wand list, and a demand for silence. The child disappears from the Muggle system, and the ministry wipes away any trail. No thought is given to the emotional burden this places on Muggle parents who are asked to trust a system they cannot see. And yet, isn't this precisely the sort of situation where a cooperative task force would make sense? A joint magical Muggle office with clearance to interact under deep cover, perhaps embedded within child services or educational oversight. A team trained to provide explanations, to monitor the mental health of Muggleborns who are often yanked from their lives without warning. But this would require trust in Muggle institutions, and that is something the ministry has never been willing to extend. "The Muggle world is full of oddities," said Alastair Moody in Goblet of Fire, warning about the threat of exposure. But Moody, like so many others, sees Muggles as a threat rather than as people. The fear is always that Muggles will find out, retaliate, weaponize their science. But isn't that the thinking of an old regime, clinging to power by painting others as dangerous? In the 21st century, the Muggle world is one of satellites, social media, GPS tracking, and government databases. It is not only dangerous, but laughably naive to believe that dozens of missing children will remain unnoticed indefinitely. Tom Riddle's story illustrates how cracks in this system can have devastating consequences. Born to a Muggle father, raised in a Muggle orphanage, and only discovered by Dumbledore at age 11, Riddle had been manifesting signs of magical ability for years. Animals disappeared around him, he caused harm to other children. Social workers documented him as disturbed. And yet there was no early intervention from the magical world, no monitoring. If the ministry had partnered with Muggle psychologists, educators, or welfare agents, the signs might have been caught earlier. Riddle might have been offered support. Instead, he was left to fester in loneliness and anger. The result? Lord Voldemort. By refusing to work with Muggle institutions, the ministry creates both magical and moral blind spots. Imagine a Muggleborn with undiagnosed health conditions. How many Hogwarts students, pulled from Muggle lives at 11, enter a world with no system for managing conditions like epilepsy, diabetes, or severe allergies? Do school mediwitches even know what an epinephrine auto-injector is? The lack of medical cooperation is not just bureaucratic, it is dangerous. There's also the issue of death. When a Muggle-born student dies, like Colin Creevey during the Battle of Hogwarts, what information reaches the Muggle authorities? Do coroners receive a body? Are death certificates issued? Or is another memory charm tossed into the air like confetti, erasing yet another thread from the fabric of Muggle reality? This is not just erasure, it is institutional cruelty disguised as secrecy. Even in times of national magical crisis, like the events of Half-Blood Prince, where attacks spill into the Muggle world, there is no structured Muggle response. The Brockdale Bridge collapses. A Muggle news broadcast calls it a freak accident, but the wizarding world knows better. Kingsley Shacklebolt, one of the most competent Aurors, works undercover as a secretary in the Muggle Prime Minister's office. But even this is a token gesture, a formality. There is no real partnership, only observation. How much more effective could the ministry be if it dropped its arrogance and accepted the value of Muggle systems. Surveillance, record-keeping, public health initiatives, these are not antithetical to magic. They could be harmonized. The Statute of Secrecy, created in 1692, is outdated in an era where children carry GPS-enabled phones and school attendance is logged daily. The Ministry's methods are a relic, and every year that passes, the risk of exposure grows. It's ironic that the Wizarding world, which prides itself on its intelligence, refuses to learn from the Muggle one. For example, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement has vast resources, yet often finds itself reacting to problems rather than preventing them. A proactive partnership with Muggle law enforcement could allow for early detection of magical disturbances, especially in Muggle areas where young witches and wizards experience their first surges of uncontrolled power. Instead, they rely on outdated magic sensors and eyewitness reports, leaving whole neighborhoods confused and terrified. The cost of this insularity is profound. The Ministry isolates magical children from their Muggle heritage, leaving many of them culturally uprooted. Hermione, again, serves as a case in point. Her knowledge of the Muggle world becomes both a strength and a source of alienation. Her classmates don't understand it. The adults patronize it. "Honestly, don't you two read?" she asks, but she might as well be asking the entire Ministry. Change would require courage. It would mean facing the possibility that the Muggle world has something to offer. It would mean creating a Department of Muggle Liaison that does more than smooth things over with the Prime Minister once every decade. It would mean embedding liaisons in every local council, every school board, every hospital. It would mean stopping the mass memory wipes and starting to trust that partnership is stronger than paranoia. The truth is simple. The Ministry fears losing control. Secrecy grants power, and power consolidated is easier to wield. Cooperation means accountability. It means that when a child like Ariana Dumbledore suffers a magical breakdown that ends in violence, there might be a therapist or social worker who says, "This child needed help." And that terrifies them. It's easier to pretend it never happened, but pretending only works until someone stops pretending back. The Muggle world is catching up. Parents are more informed. Systems are more integrated. Children don't just vanish anymore, not without leaving digital footprints, health records, social ties. The Ministry's current approach is not only outdated, it is unsustainable. One day, the disappearance of a magical child will trigger an inquiry. A teacher won't forget. A doctor will ask questions. A local newspaper will investigate. And when that day comes, no memory charm will be enough to clean up the mess. What will the Ministry do then? It will be too late to build bridges. They will already have burned. Number 18. Do some Muggleborns voluntarily give up magic? There are corridors within the wizarding world that few dare to explore, questions left to linger in the shadows of Hogwarts stone walls. One such question, unasked in the Great Hall and left unspoken in the Ministry's records, is this: what becomes of the Magicborn who choose to walk away? Not squibs who are denied magic, nor muggles who never had it, but those Muggleborn witches and wizards who, given the gift, return it. The books never told us about them. Rowling did not carve them into the sweeping saga of Harry's battle against Voldemort. But the possibility haunts the margins of the story. Could a child like Hermione Granger, brilliant and powerful, ever say no more? Could someone born to a dentist and a librarian ever look at the wizarding world, its secrets, its cruelties, its bloodlines, and decide, "This is not my home"? Hermione never did, of course. She stood and fought tooth and nail for the right to exist in a world that whispered mudblood in the halls. But what of the others? Those not so brave, not so enamored, not so willing to pay the toll exacted by the magical life. Consider the story of Emily Wren. Her name never appears in the famous chronicles, but she lived just a few dormitories away from Ginny Weasley, a year below. A Hufflepuff with quiet eyes and clever fingers, she never excelled in charms nor thrilled in transfiguration. Her greatest joy was drawing portraits of classmates, landscapes from memory. Magic never quite agreed with her. She would whisper to her wand, and it would sputter in reply. Emily was Muggleborn. Her parents, quiet folk from Devon, struggled to grasp what her Hogwarts letter meant. They visited Diagon Alley once, bemused and overwhelmed, then rarely came again. Every summer Emily grew a little more distant from them, not because they pushed her away, but because the life she led during the school year could never be shared without lies and omissions. "It's a private boarding school," she'd say to neighbours. "They teach Latin, lots of Latin." She never told her best friend Olivia back home about the ghosts or the house elves. Never spoke of the moving staircases or the dark shadows she'd seen cross the forbidden forest. When her friend asked her what the scar on her hand was, left by a misfired Jellylegs jinx, Emily just said she tripped in the library. Her 7th year came. Voldemort was gone. The world was safer. But Emily felt only more distant. The war had torn open divisions in the magical world, divisions that no longer hid behind niceties. The whispers about blood purity had turned to roars during the Death Eater's rise, and while the darkness had been defeated, its echoes lingered in classrooms and corridor corners. Mudblood didn't disappear with a dark mark. It lingered like rot beneath fresh paint. The choice came not suddenly, but in silence. After graduation, while her classmates returned to celebrate, Emily walked through Hogsmeade alone. She looked up at the towering spires of Hogwarts, once a symbol of wonder, now a monument to secrets. She returned home to Devon, to parents who asked no questions, just opened the door and made tea. Can one walk away from magic? In theory, yes. There is no binding spell that tethers a witch to the wizarding world, but the price is steep, and the decision must be final. Emily went to the ministry requesting what only a handful had asked before her: deregistration. No public record mentions this process, but those deep within magical records know of the parchment drawer labelled voluntary withdrawals. It's dusty, rarely opened, but it exists. When she made her request, a tall man with a moustache like a broomstick handed her a form. No questions asked, no judgment in his eyes, only quiet understanding. "Once you sign this," he said, "you are no longer under magical jurisdiction. No wand, no license, no access to Gringotts." She surrendered her wand. It was snapped in front of her, not as a punishment, but as a safeguard. A wand in the hands of a witch who has chosen to forget is a danger to both worlds. The pieces were stored away, deep in the ministry's vaults, where other relics of abandonment reside. But what of her memory? Was it erased, as the ministry sometimes does to muggles who see too much? No, for Muggleborn witches and wizards, memory is protected. Erasing it would violate magical ethics. Besides, magic leaves an imprint on the soul. Even if spells fade, the echo remains. So Emily remembered. She remembered every incantation, every potion lesson, every haunted hallway. She remembered Dumbledore's funeral and Luna's kindness, but she locked those memories away, like photographs in a drawer she never opened. Her life returned to normal. She went to art school, opened a gallery, married a sculptor named Theo, never had children, or maybe she did. If so, they were raised without wands, without owls, without fear. She became, to the world, an ordinary woman. To those who knew the signs, how she sometimes flinched near candles or avoided antique shops with strange auras, she was something else, a ghost of magic. The question remains, how many like Emily walk among us? The wizarding world does not keep track. It prefers stories of triumph and belonging. To leave is seen as ungrateful, cowardly even. But what if it's simply brave in a different way? Consider Colin Hart, another name you won't find in the register of Hogwarts alumni. He attended for only 2 years, a Ravenclaw with a knack for arithmancy. But magic triggered terrible migraines in him, splitting headaches that not even Madame Pomfrey could soothe. Some said it was psychosomatic, born from the tension of being torn from the Muggle world. Others whispered darker theories involving curses that festered in the blood of those not meant for magic. Colin left in the middle of 3rd year. Just disappeared. His bed sat untouched for days before the staff admitted he had withdrawn for health reasons. Truth was, he had written to the headmaster requesting release. His parents were overjoyed. They'd always found the idea of magic too odd, too invasive. Years later, a Hogwarts historian reached out to him, hoping to document the rare few who had refused the wand. Colin declined the interview. He had built a new life. He ran a computer shop in Bristol. Irony, perhaps, that a boy born to wield wands now sold wires and hard drives, but maybe that too was a kind of magic. None of this is to say magic can ever be fully extinguished. Dumbledore once said, "You think the dead we loved ever truly leave us?" The same could be said of magic. It never truly leaves. It just recedes like the tide. There is also the question of blood. What if one who walks away has children? Will the child be summoned by the letter of Hogwarts? The answer, according to internal ministry documents, is yes. Magic is not inherited like a surname. It is a spark, ignited by unknown forces. If the child is born magical, the world will come knocking. In such cases, the parent faces a cruel dilemma. Tell the child everything, thus betraying their own past, or remain silent and let the magical world claim them anew. There are rumors of one such case in the 1980s, a woman who begged Dumbledore to spare her son from the life she had fled. He declined. It is not our right to deny a child what they are, he is said to have told her. Some critics argue this is coercion, that the magical world refuses to let go of its own, but others see it differently. To be born magical is to belong to a realm of possibility and danger. The choice, painful as it is, cannot be made by a parent alone. So what happens to those who leave? They live, quietly, carefully. They bear the burden of memory, of a self once split between worlds. Some find peace, others carry sorrow. Most never return. And Hogwarts? It forgets them. The castle has no need to remember those who walk away. Its staircases still shift, its paintings still whisper. But somewhere, perhaps in a dusty record room near the Department of Mysteries, a drawer holds their names. Not carved into stone like the fallen. Just ink on parchment fading, but not gone. For magic, like love, leaves its mark, even in those who choose to walk away. Number 19. How do Muggleborn students deal with bullying? At Hogwarts, not all students were born equal, not in talent, not in lineage, and certainly not in how they were treated. For those born to Muggle parents, the transition into the wizarding world was more than learning spells and charms. It was a rebirth into a society that, despite its magic, could be just as cruel and exclusionary as the non-magical one they had left behind. Take Kevin Entwistle from Ravenclaw. His name barely rings a bell for most fans, mentioned only in passing, yet his story is one shared by many Magborns who lacked the fame of Harry or the brilliance of Hermione. Kevin entered Hogwarts with a sense of wide-eyed wonder, clutching his brand-new wand from Ollivander's with trembling hands. No wizarding blood ran in his family. His father repaired washing machines. His mother worked nights at a call centre. They had no old books, no moving photographs, no portraits that whispered secrets. Kevin was proud just to be accepted, but within days the dream began to crack. The whispers came first. Mudblood hissed in hallways, not always from Slytherins, not always loud. Sometimes it was just a glance, a smirk, or a question like, "Do Muggles really use electricity for everything?" asked not with curiosity, but derision. For students like Kevin, who hadn't grown up dueling with toy wands or hearing bedtime stories about blood traitors and goblin rebellions, Hogwarts was a place of silent codes. And he didn't know the rules. There was no orientation, no welcoming committee for Magborns. They were handed robes, books, and a schedule, and thrown into the same cauldron as everyone else. While purebloods arrived already knowing how to ride a broom, how to address a portrait, or how to flew from one fireplace to another, Kevin had to learn on the fly, often in front of jeering classmates. The worst of it wasn't just the bullying, it was the laughter when he got things wrong. Laughter cuts deep when it comes from people who think you don't belong. Teachers rarely intervened, Professors like Flitwick and Sprout offered warmth in lessons, but once the class was over, the corridors belonged to the students, and among them, hierarchy reigned. Snape, of course, was notoriously indifferent. As a former half-blood himself, he seemed to detest those who reminded him of his Muggle origins. During potions, he never corrected Draco Malfoy when he sneered at mudbloods, nor did he comfort students like Kevin when their concoctions curdled under the pressure of humiliation. Not every Muggleborn had Hermione's genius to shield them. She was a fortress of knowledge, her brilliance forming a barrier too strong to breach. Even Malfoy's taunts lost their sting when faced with her academic dominance. But others, like Sally Ann Perks, another name buried in the background, had no such armor. In her second year, she accidentally reversed a hair-lengthening charm and spent an entire week hiding her face behind books in the library. No prefect helped her. No professor asked if she was all right. The silence around her was deafening. Psychological support was not a subject taught at Hogwarts. There were no counselors, no mental health spells, no trained staff offering check-ins to Muggleborns who had just left their homes for a world where staircases moved, ghosts wailed, and everyone around them spoke of lineage like it mattered more than kindness. The Fat Friar, the Hufflepuff ghost, was perhaps the closest thing some students had to a confidant, always smiling, always willing to listen. But what could a ghost do when the bruises were on the inside? The Gryffindor common room was warm, but not always safe. Students like Dean Thomas, another Muggleborn, rarely spoke of their pasts. Dean, at least, had a calm confidence about him, an ease in his posture that masked his confusion. He didn't know he was magical until his Hogwarts letter arrived. His father, a wizard, had disappeared long ago, killed by Death Eaters, though Dean wouldn't know that for years. Still, he bore the same quiet uncertainty Kevin did. You could see it in the way he watched Seamus Finnegan and Ron Weasley talk about their childhoods, with shared references Dean simply didn't understand. The Room of Requirement could have been a sanctuary, and in the darkest days of the war it became one. But in peacetime there was no room that materialized for lonely Muggleborns overwhelmed by cultural dissonance. There were no enchanted couches for group therapy, no house elves trained in mental wellness. The culture of Hogwarts rewarded bravery, intellect, cunning, and loyalty, but offered little for vulnerability. Even within friendships, Muggleborns often bore the weight of being educators. Hermione was constantly correcting Ron, who once exclaimed, "You're Muggleborn, and you know all this," with surprise that betrayed deep-rooted assumptions. For many Muggleborns, each conversation became a minefield, either defend the Muggle world they came from, or allow it to be mocked by those who knew no better. Few had Hermione's fire. Most stayed silent. The Sorting Hat, that great arbiter of destiny, didn't account for trauma. It saw potential, yes, but did it see the quiet desperation of a child who missed their mother's voice, who cried silently under the covers of a four-poster bed because the ghosts scared them and no one explained why Peeves couldn't be banished? For Muggleborns, the cultural gap was not just academic, it was spiritual. Magic, once a dream, became a source of anxiety. Some upper-year students tried to help. Justin Finch-Fletchley, also Muggleborn, often stayed behind after charms lessons to tutor first years from non-magical families. He understood the fear. He too had once panicked at the sight of a boggart, unsure whether it would take the form of a ghost or his disapproving Muggle headmaster. He never forgot the whispers when he was petrified during the events of the Chamber of Secrets. "Serves him right," some said. "Blood doesn't lie." Kevin, like many others, found his refuge in books. Not magical textbooks, but Muggle novels smuggled into Hogwarts and read by candlelight. George Orwell, Tolkien, even comic books became his escape. In the world of Superman and Frodo, he was just a boy again, not a mudblood, not an outlier, but someone who belonged. He carried a notebook with him everywhere, drawing magical creatures and writing down things that confused him. Why do wizards not use pens? Why does no one talk about feelings? By fifth year, the divide only deepened. Owls brought stress to all students, but Magborns had to study harder just to catch up. A simple question in history of magic: who was Emeric the Evil might stump a Muggleborn who had never heard the name, while purebloods could recite the lineage of the Gaunt family in their sleep. Professor Binns droned on, indifferent to who understood and who didn't. The trauma compounded in ways that weren't always visible. Constant microaggressions chipped away at self-worth. Even casual statements like, "It's easier for purebloods," left lasting marks. Some Magborns began to resent their heritage, to downplay their pasts. They stopped writing home. They laughed at Muggle jokes, trying to blend in. Assimilation became a survival tactic. By the time Kevin reached 7th year, he had stopped speaking much in class. He still got decent grades, but his enthusiasm had dimmed. The spark that once danced in his eyes when he first levitated a feather was gone. He walked the halls with quiet detachment, counting the days until graduation. He planned to return to the Muggle world, to become a doctor maybe. He no longer dreamed of becoming an Auror or joining the Department of Mysteries. The wizarding world had not broken him, but it hadn't embraced him either. Not every Magborn left disillusioned. Some found pockets of resistance. Luna Lovegood, though not Muggleborn, extended empathy across bloodlines. Her refusal to judge others by their background inspired students like Kevin. Dumbledore, too, gave a speech once that lingered in many hearts. "You place too much importance, and you always have done, on the so-called purity of blood," he declared, in the Goblet of Fire. But words, even noble ones, didn't always reach the corners of Hogwarts where the lonely wept. Would it have been so hard to assign mentors? To pair first-year Muggleborns with older students who had walked the same path? Would it have been dangerous to host monthly support groups or allow students to share their struggles in an enchanted circle where no ridicule could enter? Perhaps those ideas belonged to another time, a future where the wizarding world recognized that not all wounds were visible. Hogwarts was a school of wonders, yes, but also one of blind spots. For many Muggleborns, their greatest achievement wasn't mastering a Patronus or brewing Polyjuice potion. It was simply surviving. Surviving the stares, the whispers, the subtle humiliations that chipped away at their identity. Magic, in the end, wasn't the only thing they had to learn. They had to master resilience. Kevin Entwistle's story didn't end with bitterness. After Hogwarts, he became a healer, not in St. Mungo's, but in a small clinic in Muggle London that treated magical children who couldn't yet control their powers. He understood them. Understood the confusion, the loneliness, the fear of being too different for either world. He offered them something Hogwarts never gave him: understanding without judgment. Because sometimes the greatest magic is being seen. Number 20, why doesn't Hogwarts teach anything about the Muggle world? The towers of Hogwarts shimmer in golden twilight, their ancient stones catching the light like dragon scales. Within those walls, generations of witches and wizards have learned to levitate feathers, brew potions that shimmer with magic, and defend themselves against creatures both seen and unseen. Yet one lesson, vital and urgent, remains conspicuously absent: the Muggle world. For decades, Hogwarts has prided itself on tradition. First years arrive wide-eyed, stepping off the Scarlet Hogwarts Express with trunks bursting with robes and books. For many, especially the Muggleborns, the transition is seismic, a dive into a world of ghosts in paintings and staircases that move at will. Professors understand this. They take care to guide these students gently, teaching them how to use quills, not pens, and how to send owls rather than emails. But what of the other half? What of the pureblood students like Draco Malfoy or Pansy Parkinson, raised in families where electricity is either a mystery or a myth? When Hermione Granger arrived at Hogwarts, she had to abandon everything she knew. She traded encyclopedias for spellbooks, exchanged maths for magical theory. Yet nowhere in the curriculum were her classmates required to meet her halfway. Ron Weasley, for example, once referred to a telephone as that loud, squawky thing and didn't know how to use one. This lack of basic Muggle knowledge is not portrayed as an oversight, it is almost a point of pride. Imagine a different kind of Hogwarts, one where every Wednesday, in a sun-drenched classroom off the library, students gather for Muggle studies, practical applications. Here, a pure-blood child like Theodore Nott might learn the difference between a debit and credit card. He'd be handed a mock iPhone, asked to search for information without summoning a book. And more importantly, he'd learn why Muggles don't stare in fear when lights turn on, because the light switch isn't cursed. This isn't idle fantasy. Wizards have repeatedly found themselves lost, literally and figuratively, in the Muggle world. Arthur Weasley, a senior employee at the Ministry of Magic, was baffled by a rubber duck. "Tell me, what exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" he asked Harry, once with complete sincerity. Arthur is perhaps the most Muggle-curious wizard in the entire series, and even he could not explain the simplest objects. And this isn't charming, it's alarming. One would think that after centuries of coexisting with Muggles, wizarding education would adapt. But no such evolution has occurred. The one class that touches on Muggle life, Muggle studies, is theoretical and often dismissed by students as irrelevant. In fact, it became a tool for propaganda under Voldemort's regime, when Charity Burbage, the former professor of the subject, was murdered for teaching that Muggles deserved respect. Her death, on Voldemort's orders, speaks volumes about the societal disdain toward understanding the non-magical. This disdain has consequences. Take the case of Sturgis Podmore, a member of the Order of the Phoenix. He was arrested trying to break into the Department of Mysteries, but how did he get caught? Magical surveillance? No. A simple Muggle security system. Reinforced doors, motion detectors, and, undoubtedly, cameras. A wizard who understood Muggle technology might have approached the mission differently. He might have known that attempting to Alohomora a steel security door doesn't deactivate an alarm, and yet Hogwarts continues to treat the Muggle world as a curiosity rather than a reality. This isn't just an academic oversight, it's a societal flaw. The statute of secrecy may separate the magical from the non-magical, but it does not erase the existence of billions of Muggles living on the same earth, breathing the same air. Wizards may prefer their own methods, but what happens when a young witch like Lily Evans once was, wants to reconnect with her Muggle family? How do you explain to your magical peers what a refrigerator is without being met with sniggers? Luna Lovegood once remarked that "you're just as sane as I am" to Harry, implying that being different doesn't mean being wrong. This is the kind of mentality that should be fostered at Hogwarts. And yet, differences are preserved, not bridged. The magical world guards its secrets so fiercely it ends up building walls where there could be windows. Let's consider the tragic case of Tom Riddle. Raised in a Muggle orphanage, he was ostracized, isolated, and feared. Upon discovering the magical world, he developed a deep-seated hatred for the one he left behind. What if, instead of erasing Muggle knowledge, Hogwarts embraced it? What if Riddle had been taught to value both worlds, to see strength in diversity rather than weakness? Some might argue that magic is superior, and thus there's no need to learn about Muggles, but superiority is not the point. Understanding is. Wizards depend on Muggles more than they admit. Magical Britain exists within a physical Britain bound by borders, weather patterns, and shared catastrophes. The Second World War, though rarely mentioned in magical texts, did not spare the wizarding population. Wizards died in those bombings, wizards bled during blackouts, and in the modern age, the gap only widens as Muggles advance, launching satellites, connecting globally, decoding DNA. Wizards remain locked in a 19th century rhythm. There are no wizarding universities, no formal magical sciences beyond what is known. Magical Britain is stagnant, a society reluctant to innovate because it fears contamination. This isn't to suggest that Hogwarts must become a Muggle school, but imagine the benefits if every student, pureblood, half-blood, or Muggleborn, left school knowing both how to operate a wand and how to book a train ticket. Imagine if Draco Malfoy, instead of sneering at Hermione's background, had been forced to engage with it, not through theory, but through practice. What prejudices might have melted? What friendships might have formed? There is also the issue of safety. In a world of facial recognition software, CCTV cameras and data tracking, wizards are more exposed than ever. A stray spell in the middle of a Muggle crowd is no longer invisible. The Ministry may modify memories, but how long before someone catches something on video and uploads it before obliviators can react? Hogwarts students should be trained for this reality. They should know what a smartphone is, how to recognize a security camera, and why apparating in front of a crowd is not just dangerous, it's irresponsible. Even the Weasleys, who often interact with Muggles, are laughably unprepared. When Arthur enchants his Ford Anglia, he does so with pride. But the car becomes a flying metal menace that terrifies half of the West Country. The incident could have exposed the entire magical world, and all because a well-meaning wizard didn't understand aerodynamics, traffic systems, or radar. One could even look to the Triwizard Tournament. It's an international event, but there is no concern given to Muggle detection. A dragon is released into the skies, and the only safeguard is a thin, magical barrier. In a world where satellites orbit constantly and air traffic is dense, this kind of oversight borders on recklessness. Education must prepare students for the real world. And in this case, the real world includes the non-magical. Some might say the answer lies in the parents. Let them teach their children. But that only deepens inequality. Muggleborns are expected to adapt fully to a world of magic, but pure bloods are allowed ignorance. Education is the great equalizer, or it should be. Without formal training, ignorance becomes a luxury afforded only to those with magical privilege. There are glimmers of change. In some fan interpretations, future headmistresses like Hermione Granger reform the curriculum to include Muggle integration. There's a fictional elective where students must spend a week living without magic. No wands, no charms, just cash, computers, and public transport. It is meant to teach resilience, but more importantly, perspective. A pure-blood child who must navigate a Muggle grocery store gains not just knowledge but empathy. Hogwarts is a place of wonder, but it is also a place of gaps. Places where knowledge ends and assumptions begin. In not teaching students about the Muggle world, it allows old prejudices to harden into dogma. It encourages insularity when what the magical world needs most is dialogue. The books give us glimpses. Hermione's parents visit Diagon Alley, but they remain in the background, ghosts in a world not meant for them. Dudley Dursley, after Harry saves his life, begins to change. But the walls are thick. The magical world, for all its marvels, is afraid of the ordinary, and yet in the end, it is the ordinary that saves it. Harry wins not through ancient runes, but through love, something that exists in both worlds. The magical and the Muggle are not enemies, they are mirrors. And perhaps if Hogwarts ever dares to teach both reflections, it will finally become the school it was meant to be. Number 21. How do Muggleborns cope with dual identity? There is something inherently fragile in being torn between two worlds. Muggleborn witches and wizards live this fracture every day. They are born into ordinary, non-magical families, into homes where light comes from bulbs, letters are typed on keyboards, and transportation is grounded firmly on wheels, not broomsticks. Then, with a single letter from Hogwarts, that reality splits. A new world, one that defies gravity, logic, and reason, claims them as its own, and suddenly they must learn to speak a language their families do not understand. Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, is perhaps the most visible example. Her parents were Muggle dentists. Her world was textbooks, dental tools, school uniforms, and scheduled bedtimes. Yet by the time she was 12, she had faced trolls, basilisks, and time travel. She mastered spells that had been passed down for centuries among old wizarding families. But for all her brilliance, there are clues in the books that Hermione often felt the pressure of standing between two identities. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Slughorn dismisses the dangers of snogging because we're not Muggles, Hermione flinches. That line isn't just about romance, it's about who belongs. The emotional toll of such duality is subtle, like a steady drip of rain over stone. For Muggleborns, every homecoming after a school year is a cultural whiplash. They must trade wands for smartphones, robes for jeans, and mythical creatures for kitchen pets. Dean Thomas, another Muggle-born student, rarely speaks of his background, but J.K. Rowling has confirmed in interviews that he was raised by a Muggle mother and never knew he was magical until Hogwarts. It is telling that Dean, despite being friendly and open, never delves into his family life. That silence is its own kind of grief. Muggleborns live in a kind of liminality. When they are in the wizarding world, they are constantly reminded of their origin. Draco Malfoy's frequent use of mudblood isn't just slander. It's a reminder that no matter how talented they are, some will always view them as outsiders. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Malfoy calls Hermione a filthy little mudblood, Ron's reaction is one of outrage, but Hermione's is one of stunned silence. Her silence echoes louder than Ron's slugs. It says, "I know I don't belong, and now everyone else knows it too." Even in success, the duality persists. Take Lily Evans, mother of Harry Potter. A gifted Muggle-born witch, she won the admiration of professors and peers alike. Yet her sister, Petunia, could never accept her. Petunia's hatred wasn't just jealousy, it was also fear, the fear of losing a shared past to a world she couldn't enter. Petunia's bitterness was a mirror of how even familial love can fracture under the weight of magical difference. Lily may have been celebrated in Hogwarts, but at home her very identity ruptured the only family she ever had. This estrangement becomes more pronounced after Hogwarts. A wizarding career often requires complete immersion in the magical world, but Muggleborns carry decades of Muggle knowledge, cultural references, habits, even body language that don't align with their peers. They may joke about elevators, only to be met with blank stares. They may crave coffee from machines rather than conjuring it. They live between instincts, reaching for a light switch one day, summoning Lumos the next. Imagine a young Muggle-born Aura in the Ministry of Magic. He's just arrested a dark wizard, a feat that should bring pride, but when he tells his parents, he must translate everything. They nod, trying to understand, but they cannot grasp what it means to deflect a killing curse. Their pride is real, but it lacks texture. He feels celebrated and alienated in the same moment. This emotional solitude is not visible to others. It exists in the quiet seconds after victory. Another layer of this dual identity is the moral dilemma. Muggleborns know both worlds. They see how each could benefit the other, but magical secrecy forbids it. Hermione fights for house elf rights, perhaps because she comes from a world where inequality is openly discussed. Her compassion is rooted in her Muggle upbringing. Yet the wizarding world resists change. Even the most progressive wizards often cling to tradition. This resistance leaves Muggleborn suspended between ideals and ancient customs. Colin Creevey embodies this tension. He arrived at Hogwarts starry-eyed, always with a camera in hand. To Colin, everything was new, magical, worthy of awe. But behind that excitement was a desire to belong, to prove that he deserved his place. Colin dies in the Battle of Hogwarts, a Muggle-born boy who gave his life to a world that sometimes doubted he should even be there. His death is one of the quietest in the book, but perhaps one of the most tragic. There's also the question of identity within relationships. When a Muggle-born dates or marries a Muggle, secrecy becomes a burden. The statute of secrecy forces them into a double life. Do they tell the truth and risk endangering someone? Do they lie and bury half their soul? Justin Finch-Fletchley, who nearly died in Chamber of Secrets, was originally bound for Eton before Hogwarts changed his path. One wonders what happened to that version of his life. Did he ever try to return to the Muggle world? Rowling never gives us a handbook for how Muggleborns reconcile their split identity. And perhaps that is intentional, because identity is not a fixed thing. It bends, stretches, and sometimes breaks. The absence of resolution in the books reflects a deeper truth, that many Muggleborns never fully settle into either world. They hover in between, forging new pathways no one else can see. One powerful metaphor for this condition is the night bus. It appears only to those in need, invisible to Muggles. It rushes through the night, chaotic, slightly unsafe, always moving. For many Muggleborns, life feels like that. They are passengers between destinations, never fully arrived. The psychological cost of dual identity also involves self-doubt. When things go wrong, some Muggleborns internalize the belief that they are imposters in the magical world. When Hermione is doubted by Professor Snape or dismissed by pure-blood students, those moments linger. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when she turns back time to attend multiple classes, it's not just ambition, it's compulsion. She must be the best or risk being dismissed as a fluke. But dual identity can also be a source of strength. Muggleborns bring creativity, adaptability, and a sense of wonder to the wizarding world. Arthur Weasley is fascinated by Muggles because they manage to do so much without magic. That resourcefulness, ingrained in Muggleborns, makes them valuable. Their brains are wired to solve problems with or without spells. Their dual perspective allows them to see flaws others ignore. There is also a legacy of Muggleborn resistance. In Deathly Hallows, when the Ministry is taken over by Voldemort, Muggleborns are hunted, interrogated, imprisoned. Yet many fight back. They become the quiet backbone of the resistance. Ted Tonks, though not a Hogwarts student, was born to Muggle parents and stood by his daughter Nymphadora and the Order until the end. His courage reflects the Muggle-born resilience, quiet, enduring, unshakable. A deeper sorrow lies in the fact that Muggleborns often feel they must erase part of themselves. To belong in the magical world, they tone down their references, curb their habits, forget their favorite songs or books. In doing so, they lose pieces of their past. The wizarding world asks for full immersion, but it rarely meets them halfway. This gap is generational too. When Muggleborns have children, what identity do they pass on? If they marry magical folk, their children may never know what it is to live without magic. If they marry Muggles, the question becomes harder. Do they send their children to Hogwarts knowing the chasm that awaits? Do they raise them with both worlds, hoping integration is possible? The fear of exposure also never truly vanishes. Despite all their achievements, Muggleborns know their secret is always vulnerable. A wrong wand movement in a public place, an accidental mention of Quidditch, a spark from a misfired spell. They live with the constant awareness of how fragile the veil is. They must always be careful, always hiding, even among friends. In the end, the experience of a Muggleborn is not just about learning magic, it's about learning how to carry two realities, how to speak two languages, how to celebrate their gift while mourning what it costs. They are not just witches and wizards, they are bridges, connectors, translators of worlds that rarely intersect. But bridges carry weight. They bend under pressure, they weather storms, and though some collapse, others hold firm. They remain standing even if no one thanks them, even if no one truly understands what it means to live where two worlds meet. That is the unseen legacy of the Muggleborns. They are not simply magical anomalies. They are proof that identity is not something we are born into, but something we build brick by brick between the known and the impossible. Number 22. What happens? If a Muggleborn marries a Muggle, when Hermione Granger left Hogwarts, she had more than her share of stories to tell. Dragons, trolls, time-turners. But even more pressing than exams or Dark Lords was the question that loomed after the final battle. How would she go back to the world she came from? Not the wizarding world, but the one where people didn't believe in magic, wands, or the Minister for Magic. It's a question few wizards or witches want to answer, and even fewer dare to live. What happens when a Muggle-born wizard marries someone who never received a Hogwarts letter? Someone like Hermione's own parents, or perhaps someone she might have fallen in love with later had life gone differently. Consider Daniel Flint, a lesser-known figure in Hogwarts class of 2005. Not related to Marcus Flint the Slytherin, Daniel was a soft-spoken Ravenclaw whose Muggle parents owned a quaint flower shop in Norwich. Unlike his pureblood peers, Daniel had always straddled two realities. He'd spend summers helping his mum arrange lilies and freesias, and then return to Hogwarts, where suits became robes and buses became broomsticks. Years after graduation, Daniel chose to return to the Muggle world for good. He joined a local university, studied literature, and eventually met a woman named Laura Pennington, a curious, grounded, and wholly non-magical human who thought Hogsmeade was a type of beer. They fell in love in the ordinary way, over late-night coffee, shared book recommendations, and long walks under orange-lit streets. And as it often happens in both magical and non-magical worlds, they married. But marriage to a wizard comes with more than love and compromise. It comes with hidden rooms, secret spells, and the weight of an invisible society resting on one's shoulders. In Daniel's case, it also came with lies. The Statute of Secrecy, enacted in 1692 and still enforced by the International Confederation of Wizards, strictly prohibits the exposure of the magical world to Muggles. The only exception is when a Muggle is directly affected, such as when their child is invited to Hogwarts. Otherwise, as the book says, wizards must live in secrecy, lest they bring destruction on both worlds. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Newt Scamander. Daniel knew that, but he also knew something else, that living in two worlds required sacrifices. For the first 2 years of his marriage, he pretended his wand was a family heirloom. He told Laura he was part of a strange, eccentric club that met in old castles. He called magical creatures fantasy writing material and disguised magical letters as spam from obscure mailing lists. It worked, for a while. The pressure of double life is not unknown in wizarding history. In Hogwarts, a history, there's mention of a Hufflepuff named Eliza McNair who vanished mysteriously in 1813 after marrying a Muggle and allegedly revealing her secret. No body was ever found. Rumors whispered that the Obliviators were involved. Some even say she was given a new identity in a remote corner of Canada. The tragedy is not in her disappearance, Warner, but in the fact that her love story was never allowed to be told. Daniel Flint was not about to vanish, but something inside him began to fade. Every lie to Laura chipped away at him, not just because he loved her, but because she trusted him with the kind of openness that only non-magical people can afford. For Muggles, the world has fewer hidden compartments. They live in the light. Wizards, even the kindest ones, live in a shadow they cannot control. Eventually, Daniel sought help from the only place he could, the Ministry of Magic. He requested a conditional disclosure hearing, a rare and bureaucratically dense process that allows Muggleborns to appeal for permission to reveal their identity to a Muggle spouse. The paperwork was endless. The interviews were humiliating. One ministry official, a former Slytherin named Augustus Blott, asked him, "Would you feel the same about her if she knew you could transfigure her furniture?" Yet, through sheer persistence and a letter of recommendation from Professor Flitwick himself, Daniel won the right to tell Laura the truth. The conditions were strict. She must sign a secrecy agreement, undergo a basic understanding course on the magical world, and submit to annual reviews by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The moment of truth came on a grey Saturday afternoon. Daniel told her everything, from the sorting hat to the final exams, from levitation charms to the dueling club. He even showed her his wand. Her reaction? She laughed, then cried, then asked if there were dragons. When he said yes, she just whispered, "I knew there was something different about you." Their life changed, but not in the way Daniel feared. Laura didn't run. She adapted. She learned. She even helped him set up a garden of magical and non-magical plants, blending dittany with lavender, gillyweed with mint. The two worlds didn't crash. They danced, awkwardly at first, then with something that resembled grace. But not all stories end like Daniel's. In 1983, a witch named Nora Bell from Ottery St. Catchpole was denied permission to tell her husband the truth. When her magical pregnancy began affecting local weather patterns, thunderstorms during morning sickness, she had to be transferred to St. Mungo's under a false identity. Her husband, believing she had died in a storm, never saw her again. "She was erased from both worlds," wrote a colleague in a confidential memo stored at the Ministry's archives of magical irregularities. That's the haunting truth of interworld relationships. When a Muggleborn marries a Muggle, they are often forced to become architects of falsehood. Some choose to walk away from magic entirely. Others live double lives so complex they forget who they were before. Very few are lucky enough or stubborn enough to fight for the space in between. Hermione herself once described the burden in a private note, now archived in the Black family vault. Being born to two worlds means you belong to both and neither, but love should not require deception. One day, I hope, magic and honesty will not be mutually exclusive. Even in canon, we see glimmers of this struggle. Take Dean Thomas, for example. Though not Muggleborn himself, his father was a wizard who never told the family the truth. He disappeared mysteriously when Dean was a child, and it wasn't until much later that Dean understood why. "He never abandoned us," Dean told Seamus years later. "He died protecting the secret." It's that kind of secrecy that binds the magical community, but it's also what fractures it. Love between worlds is not just romantic, it's revolutionary. Every Muggleborn who loves a Muggle, every wizard who dares to be honest, they challenge the ancient, cobweb-covered laws of separation. Minister Kingsley Shacklebolt, during his term, tried to reform these laws. He introduced the Transparency Accord in 2001, which allowed for limited cross-cultural education between Muggles and wizards in controlled environments. It didn't last. Fear, as always, won the day. Still, the tide may change. Wizards like Daniel Flint are not anomalies. They are pioneers. Each whispered confession, each carefully told truth weakens the wall between the magical and the mundane. It doesn't take down the statute of secrecy, but it adds a door. And maybe one day, enough doors will become a bridge. In the end, what happens when a Muggleborn marries a Muggle? They must decide how much truth their love can carry. They must learn to live in twilight, not quite sunlight, not quite shadow. And in that fragile light, they must plant their life like a secret garden, watered with lies, pruned by hope, and perhaps, if they're lucky, blooming with trust. That's not fantasy. That's not just a tale for children who dream of letters and owls. That's the real magic, choosing love in a world that says you must choose sides. Number 23. Why doesn't Hogwarts respect Muggleborn cultural differences? At first glance, Hogwarts appears to be a marvel of magical learning. A castle brimming with secrets, enchantments, and centuries-old traditions. But beneath the floating candles of the Great Hall and the moving staircases, there lies a deep, unspoken issue that has persisted for generations. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry does not account for the cultural differences of Muggleborn students. These students, dropped abruptly into an unfamiliar world, are expected not just to learn magic, but to abandon the identities and customs they were raised with. Hermione Granger, one of the most celebrated Muggleborns in the school's recent history, exemplifies the burden of assimilation. Raised by two dentists in a modern British household, she entered Hogwarts with no knowledge of magical customs. Yet the moment she walked through those grand oak doors, she was expected to know how to navigate a world where letters arrive by owl and portraits talk back. When Professor McGonagall announces that the sorting is a very important ceremony because while you are here, your house will be something like your family, it presumes a shared cultural background, one that Hermione and others like her simply do not have. The traditions at Hogwarts are not simply different, they are alien. Quills and inkpots replace pens and notebooks. Robes and cloaks take the place of jeans and hoodies. While these details may seem charming or quaint, to a Muggleborn they are symbols of erasure. There is no effort to incorporate or even acknowledge the world they come from. No accommodations are made. The curriculum assumes every child has grown up reading the tales of Beedle the Bard or knows that a bezoar can save your life from poisoning. Dean Thomas, another Muggleborn, was raised by a single mother in London. He didn't even know he was a wizard until he received his letter at age 11. Dean, who loved football, art, and comic books, suddenly found himself in a world where none of those passions mattered. His knowledge, his hobbies, his cultural references, all were irrelevant. There is no record of Hogwarts attempting to bridge that gap, no class to help him understand wizarding lore, no guidance on magical customs, no mentorship from students who had walked that path before. The wizarding world did not bend toward him, he was expected to bend toward it. Even the use of language at Hogwarts presents a challenge. Terms like squib, mudblood, and muggle carry specific connotations, none of which are explained or contextualized for new students. In fact, when Draco Malfoy first calls Hermione a mudblood, the insult is only explained after the fact by Ron, who describes it as a really foul name for someone who is Muggleborn. There is no proactive education to shield Muggleborns from the bigotry they may encounter. No defense is taught until the damage is already done. And what of food, customs, or holidays? Hogwarts celebrates Halloween and Christmas with gusto, but what of students from Muggle families who may celebrate other holidays or who come from different cultural or religious backgrounds? The feast tables do not reflect any variety beyond what is traditional in the British wizarding world. There is no Diwali, no Hanukkah, no Eid. The magical world assumes a monoculture, and Hogwarts enforces it. To attend the school is not merely to learn spells, but to abandon a previous life. This forced assimilation becomes especially poignant in the classroom. In potions class, students are expected to chop and brew using ancient tools and vague instructions. Add 2 drops of fluxweed, stir counterclockwise until it turns blue, Professor Snape might command. There is no mention of scientific reasoning, no encouragement of experimentation, and certainly no room for questioning. This teaching style is not only unfamiliar to Muggleborns raised in critical thinking environments, it's often hostile. When Hermione dares to challenge Snape or raise a hand to clarify, she is met not with understanding but contempt. The absence of any elective or preparatory course for magical culture is a glaring oversight. Muggle Studies exists, but it is designed for purebloods who wish to learn about the Muggle world, not for Muggleborns who wish to retain their cultural roots. Why isn't there a corresponding class, Wizarding Studies for Muggleborns, a class that would explain goblin banking, magical government, the social dynamics of blood purity, or even how to navigate Diagon Alley, a class that would say, "We understand you come from a different world. Let us help you understand this one without demanding you forget who you were." The sorting system itself is another issue. It happens before a student has taken a single class based not on their choice, but on a magical hat's reading of their character. How can an 11-year-old child from the Muggle world possibly understand what it means to be in Hufflepuff versus Slytherin? How can they grasp the weight of that identity? It is not a choice based on understanding, but one imposed upon them without context. Moreover, Hogwarts upholds an education system frozen in time. There is little evidence of technological progress or reform. While Muggle schools have adopted interactive whiteboards, online learning, and modern pedagogy, Hogwarts still uses parchment and goblets. There is a stubborn pride in tradition, but tradition without adaptation becomes exclusion. The school's refusal to evolve suggests that its administrators, from Dumbledore to McGonagall, prioritize magical purity over inclusivity. A striking moment comes during Order of the Phoenix, when the Ministry attempts to interfere at Hogwarts. Dolores Umbridge implements rules that restrict freedom of speech, ban student organizations, and enforce strict conformity. While her presence is rightly condemned, the truth is that Hogwarts already demanded conformity from its Muggleborns. The difference is that Umbridge did it openly. The school's existing system does so quietly, through robes, rituals, and the unspoken expectation that students will abandon their former selves. Hogwarts is not just a school, it is a society, and in that society, culture is tightly controlled. The ghosts, the paintings, even the very architecture reflects a singular heritage. There are no Muggleborn portraits on the walls, no statues celebrating Muggleborn heroes. Even the founders, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin, were all of magical lineage. The school's legacy is one of exclusion masked as nobility. Take Colin Creevey, the Muggleborn student obsessed with taking photographs. His use of a Muggle camera was seen as odd, even amusing. While others carried wands, he carried a lens, a tool of his world. There was no encouragement of this creativity, no suggestion that the magical and Muggle might be combined in new ways. Instead, Colin was a curiosity. His death in the Battle of Hogwarts went largely unremarked, a boy who straddled two worlds and in the end belonged to neither. The lack of cultural sensitivity at Hogwarts is not merely an academic oversight, it is a moral failure. These children are not blank slates. They come from families with their own values, religions, habits and histories. To expect them to erase that at the castle gates is cruel. A truly inclusive school would recognize the richness they bring and find ways to merge the magical with the modern. One must also question the message this sends to the wizarding community at large. If Hogwarts, the most prestigious magical institution in Britain, refuses to adapt to its students, what hope is there for the Ministry of Magic or St. Mungo's or the Daily Prophet? The foundation of magical society is built in these castle walls. If assimilation is the price of admission, then the system is broken. Luna Lovegood, though not Muggleborn, serves as a reminder of what happens when one refuses to conform. She is ridiculed for her eccentricity, mocked for her beliefs, and excluded from social circles. What, then, must it be like for Muggleborns whose entire worldview differs? They do not merely wear radish earrings. They live a life the wizarding world has never understood. And unlike Luna, they are not always protected by lineage or legacy. The irony is that the wizarding world itself is obsessed with secrecy. The Statute of Secrecy mandates that witches and wizards remain hidden from Muggles. But in demanding that Muggleborns abandon their heritage, Hogwarts creates the very schism it fears. It alienates those who could have served as bridges between the two worlds. Instead of cultivating ambassadors, it produces outsiders, or worse, reluctant participants who feel they must choose one identity over another. In the end, the fault lies not in tradition, but in the refusal to examine it. The founders could not have predicted the challenges of the modern age, but those who run the school today can. Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, never established a program for Muggle-born transition. McGonagall, for all her fairness, never offered an elective for cultural adaptation. The faculty is learned, but they are not always empathetic. To change this would not require destroying Hogwarts' legacy, but expanding it. Let there be courses in magical integration, spaces for students to share their stories, robes in colours of their choosing, and textbooks that reference both wandwork and the World Wide Web. Let there be portraits of Muggleborns who changed the wizarding world. Let Hermione's voice be heard, not just in the library, but in the curriculum. Let Hogwarts become not just a school for magic, but a home for all who believe in it. Until then, the castle will remain what it has always been, a place of wonders and blind spots. Number 24. Do Muggleborns ever rise to power in the wizarding world? In the grand halls of the Ministry of Magic, where decisions shape the magical fabric of Britain, a single question echoes through the generations. Can a Muggleborn ever truly hold the reins of power? Hermione Granger is the name that bursts forth when this question is raised. Bright as the flames of her first conjured incendio, brave as any lion of Gryffindor, and more capable than many pure bloods with centuries of magical heritage behind them. She fought in the Battle of Hogwarts, faced Death Eaters, rewrote the rules of magical ethics, and still the climb was steep. After the war, Hermione entered the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, championing the rights of house elves and underprivileged beings. Her intellect earned her promotions, and eventually she moved to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. It is often whispered that she later became Minister for Magic, and yet even this was framed as the exception that proved the rule. Hermione's rise was not a smooth ascent, but an uphill battle against systemic invisibility. Her victories were rarely celebrated as milestones for Muggleborns, but rather dismissed as outcomes of her unique brilliance, as if only someone of her near supernatural gifts could possibly reach such heights. implying that ordinary Muggleborns need not apply. Beyond Hermione, the silence grows deafening. The leadership of the magical world reads like a registry of ancient blood. Shacklebolt, though a half-blood, was still part of a respected lineage of magical ancestry. His appointment as Minister for Magic after Voldemort's fall was a much-needed progressive moment, but did not spark a tidal wave of change. The old names still lingered like spectres in every chamber of influence. The Malfoys, with their tarnished legacy, remained wealthy, still respected in certain pure blood circles. The Knots and Selwyns continued to hold sway. Even with many Death Eaters imprisoned, their ideologies quietly endured in the unspoken hierarchies. Nowhere is this more apparent than in Hogwarts itself. The headmasters and headmistresses throughout history, from Phineas Nigellus Black to Armando Dippet to Albus Dumbledore, were almost exclusively pureblood, or at most half-bloods. The only Muggle-born teacher of high prominence in recent memory was Charity Burbage, who taught Muggle studies and was tragically murdered by Voldemort, a symbol of the hostility Muggleborns still face. Professors like Phileas Flitwick and Pomona Sprout had mixed bloodlines, but not one Muggleborn ever led the institution. It's not just about blood, some argue. It's about tradition, about legacy. Yet this legacy curiously overlaps with wealth, old names, and closed networks. Magical Britain, for all its wonders, is startlingly feudal. Portraits of long-dead pure-blood wizards still line the walls of power. Ancient family trees are treated as credentials. Even the Sorting Hat, a sentient relic of the founders, once warned the students of the perils of division, singing, "Though condemned I am to split you, still I worry for your fate." And yet division persists, not just among the houses, but among bloodlines. What of the Ministry's departments? In the Department of International Magical Cooperation, for instance, decisions that affect alliances with foreign wizarding governments are often made by witches and wizards from families tied into that same international elite. A position like head of the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, vital for maintaining the statute of secrecy, is rarely granted to those outside the old circles. There is no official blood requirement, of course, and that would be illegal post-war, but informal barriers remain deeply entrenched. Few Muggleborns even attempt to climb those ladders. Many are content, or perhaps forced, to mid-level posts. Those with ambitions are gently discouraged, subtly isolated, or shuffled into departments with limited upward mobility. Magical education, too, plays a role. Although Hogwarts is free, the cultural capital needed to thrive, knowledge of wizarding customs, fluency in gobbledygook, familiarity with the politics of Gringotts, is inherited, not taught. Gringotts itself stands as a fortress of exclusion. Run entirely by goblins, yet closely tied to wizarding wealth, it remains a gatekeeper. Muggleborns rarely have inherited vaults or family fortunes. Most arrive in the magical world with nothing but a letter. Even with brilliance and courage, they begin from the bottom of a social hierarchy invisible to the eye but deeply felt in every transaction. The Wizengamot, the wizarding world's highest court, resembles a hereditary senate more than a modern legal body. Names like Abbot, Longbottom, and Greengrass dominate. Few know how one even gets appointed to the Wizengamot. There's no public election, no clear application. It is anointed, sometimes by merit, but often by legacy. This caste-like structure is especially ironic in a world that prides itself on merit. Hogwarts house points, OWLs, NEWTs, all ostensibly reward skill and knowledge, but what of Hermione's first year, when she was penalized for knowing too much? Severus Snape openly mocked her eagerness. Ron Weasley, though a friend, was irritated by her intelligence. Muggleborns are taught early on to hide their excellence, to be less threatening, less bossy. There are countless unnamed Muggleborns whose paths we never hear about. The ministry clerk whose ideas are passed over in favour of a pure blood's rephrasing. The aura recruit who failed the final test not for lack of skill but for being not the right fit. The potion apprentice turned away by an old master who believes Muggleborns lack instinct for magical brewing. During Voldemort's regime, the persecution of Muggleborns was overt and violent. They were hunted, imprisoned, stripped of wands. But the more insidious danger now lies in the quiet return of the old order. this time under the guise of politeness, civility, and procedural fairness. Prejudice cloaked in bureaucracy is harder to fight. Take the example of the Malfoy family. Despite Lucius's crimes, he escaped Azkaban. Draco, though reformed, still inherited his manner and influence. His mother Narcissa, who lied to save Harry, was hailed as a heroine in some circles, erasing years of support for Voldemort. Meanwhile, the families of Muggleborn victims faded into obscurity. The magical media is complicit. The Daily Prophet rarely profiles Muggleborn success stories unless they are extraordinary. Rita Skeeter, a name synonymous with scandal, once implied in an article that Hermione's rise was aided by her close relationship with Harry Potter. The insinuation discredited her intellect and framed her ascent as opportunism. Even the very concept of Muggleborn is problematic. No one speaks of wizardborns or magically raised. The term marks one as an outsider, no matter how skilled. It is a label that never fades, unlike house affiliations or school grades. Once Muggleborn, always marked. Within the walls of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, Muggleborn healers are exceedingly rare. Why? Because their apprenticeship is harder to obtain. Professors recommend students from families they trust. Alumni write letters for those they know. Nepotism, while never named, thrives in a world where bloodlines double as resumes. One might point to Dean Thomas, a Muggleborn who fought valiantly in the final battle. Yet after the war his path is unclear. He is rarely mentioned in records of government or educational posts. Seamus Finnegan, a half-blood, retained more ties to the wizarding world. Dean, like many others, likely faded into the background, his bravery noted but unrewarded. Contrast that with Percy Weasley, who, despite his betrayal of his family and misguided allegiance during Fudge's tenure, rose to become head of the Department of Magical Transportation. Pure blood status and the name Weasley allowed rehabilitation. A Muggleborn in the same position might never recover from such a misstep. Kingsley Shacklebolt remains a beacon, a man who fought for justice and tried to reform the system, but he was just one man, and systemic change cannot rest on shoulders alone. When he stepped down as minister, the old networks reasserted themselves. The next minister, though less conservative than his predecessors, did not open the floodgates to Muggleborn advancement. Change is slow in the wizarding world. Centuries of tradition resist the tide, but the danger is not just in inertia, it is in the illusion of progress. As long as Hermione is held up as the lone example, the system can point to her and say, "See, the door is open." But one open door does not make a home welcoming. In truth, magical Britain still functions as an oligarchy cloaked in robes of equality. Blood still whispers in the ears of power, and names still open doors that talent alone cannot. Until this changes, the Muggleborn witch or wizard who dreams of becoming minister or headmaster must first battle not just for merit, but for the right to be seen at all. And that is the true tragedy of magical Britain. Number 25. Why are there no Muggleborn professors at Hogwarts? Among the echoing stone corridors of Hogwarts, ancient traditions whisper louder than the chatter of enchanted portraits. The school, a beacon of magical education for centuries, is draped in the dignity of age, but with age often comes rigidity. Walk into any classroom and you'll see witches and wizards teaching with authority, experience, and in most cases, magical lineage. But something is missing, a voice, a presence, an entire group of people. One begins to wonder, where are the Muggleborn professors? Look closely. Professor McGonagall, a proud Scottish witch with an unmatched command of transfiguration, pure blood. Severus Snape, the dark and complicated potions master, half-blood, raised in a troubled magical home. Phileas Flitwick, tiny and brilliant, with Ravenclaw wit and dueling trophies. Part goblin, yes, but undeniably raised in magical tradition. Not a single professor among them hails from Muggleborn heritage. In a school meant to serve all magical children, the absence is deafening. Consider the case of Hermione Granger, one of the brightest minds ever to set foot in the castle. She was known to master spells beyond her year, brew flawless potions, and even outwit magical devices older than Hogwarts itself. Her OWL and NEWT scores were the envy of many. Yet when the dust of war settled, when Voldemort was vanquished and the world of magic stood at a crossroads, Hermione did not return to teach. She went to the Ministry of Magic. Some say it was to change laws and liberate house elves, but one cannot help but ask, why did no one offer her a position to pass on her unparalleled knowledge? It's tempting to write this off as coincidence. Perhaps Hermione simply preferred politics. Perhaps the role of professor did not appeal to her. But when not a single Muggleborn professor exists, not during Harry's years, nor mentioned in the extended lore, the pattern starts to resemble more than chance. It becomes a silence, a secret tradition cloaked in academic robes and the illusion of neutrality. Albus Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, once said, "It matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." Yet Hogwarts, under his own leadership, did not break this invisible wall. For all his progressive beliefs, Dumbledore's hiring patterns remained conventional. Could it be that even he bowed, perhaps unconsciously, to the unwritten rules of magical academia? There is an unspoken truth in the wizarding world. Knowledge is passed like inheritance. In magical families, parents teach spells before a child even gets a wand. Magical education doesn't begin at 11. It's nurtured at home, in bedtime stories about Grindylows and family grimoire rituals. By the time a pure-blood child enters Hogwarts, they carry generations of magical literacy. A Muggle-born child, no matter how brilliant, arrives with none of that. They are constantly catching up. And perhaps, just perhaps, the doors to becoming a professor remain closed not by active prejudice but by systemic exclusion. It's not merely about knowing magic. It's about knowing how the magical world works. The politics, the connections, the subtle nods and passwords that get you considered for a post in Hogwarts' sacred halls. Muggleborns, even the gifted ones, often lack access to these channels. Hogwarts positions, especially teaching roles, are rarely announced in public. They are inherited, passed through networks, or offered quietly to those already known in the inner circles of magical society. Think of Horace Slughorn, a master of connections. His Slug Club existed to spot talent, but also to ensure that talent remained within reach of influence. He saw potential in Muggleborns like Lily Evans, one of the brightest I ever taught. And yet, Lily never returned to teach. She married James Potter, joined the Order, and died too young. But even if she had lived, would she have been considered for a staff role? Or would the whispers of her bloodline have kept her from that table? Muggleborns often spend their post-Hogwarts years proving themselves twice as hard, not just to demonstrate magical ability, but to gain cultural legitimacy. Many go into fields that promise practical impact, magical law, social reform, international cooperation, areas where brilliance is rewarded with less prejudice. Teaching, however, remains cloistered, ceremonial, and guarded. It is a place of tradition, not change. During the Second Wizarding War, Hogwarts saw desperate times. Professors left, others died. The castle stood battered and half abandoned, and still, no Muggleborns were invited to its faculty. Even when the school needed rebuilding, when it cried out for renewal and reform, it called upon the old names. Kingsley Shacklebolt restructured the ministry. Andromeda Tonks raised a child. Hermione rewrote laws. But Hogwarts? Hogwarts went back to business as usual. The culture of academia in the magical world does not separate knowledge from blood. There is no university system, no peer-reviewed scholarship in the way Muggles would recognize. Learning is mentorship, inheritance, legacy. The professor is not just a teacher. They are a gatekeeper. And the gates, though invisible, are often spelled shut to those without the right surname or the right ancestors in their family tree. Even magical textbooks betray this bias. Look at A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot, filled with names and narratives that elevate pure-blood families, that frame magical history as the tale of noble lineages. The voice of the Muggleborn is nearly absent, as though their contributions are temporary flashes, not part of the eternal magical thread. One might argue, what about Charity Burbage, the Muggle Studies professor? Indeed, she was sympathetic to Muggleborns and their rights, but even she was not Muggleborn. Her subject was Muggles, not her heritage. She taught about the non-magical world, but she did not emerge from it. And when she was murdered by Voldemort and fed to Nagini, her death symbolized the final severance of empathy between the two worlds. To teach at Hogwarts is to embody its legacy, and legacy in the magical world is insular. The Sorting Hat sang in Order of the Phoenix, "Though condemned we may be as a cliquish lot, we only truly value what we've got." The Hat speaks of unity, but it admits division. That division bleeds into hiring, into curriculum, into who gets to speak and who is simply studied. In truth, the problem may not be prejudice in the explicit sense, no sign on the gates that says no Muggleborns allowed. But it's a matter of what's normalized. A pure blood applying to teach is seen as a continuation. A Muggleborn applying might be seen as a deviation, not unwelcome perhaps, but unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity, in an institution like Hogwarts, is rarely rewarded. There is a tragic irony in this. Muggleborns, who often arrive at Hogwarts in awe, revering the magic, valuing the education more than anyone, are the ones left out of its future. They graduate, they contribute, they save lives, but they do not return to pass it on. And so their perspective is lost. Year after year, generation after generation. What would Hogwarts look like with a Muggleborn charms professor? Someone who didn't grow up knowing Lumos, but who learned it in a drafty classroom and still fell in love with its light. What would a Muggleborn herbology teacher bring? Someone who once tended daisies in a Muggle garden and now coaxes devil's snare with tenderness, not fear. Their insights would be new. Their connection to students from both worlds, deeper. But the chance is rarely given. If knowledge is power, then Hogwarts hoards it. Not deliberately, not with cruelty, but with habit. The habit of choosing the known, the familiar, the trusted. But in doing so, it preserves a version of history that is incomplete. It sends a message: you may learn here, but you may not lead here. Perhaps this is why the most transformative changes in the magical world have come not from Hogwarts professors, but from its students: Harry, Hermione, Luna, Neville. Those who broke rules, questioned systems, rebelled. They changed the world not through teaching, but through action, because the classroom was never truly open to them beyond graduation. If the magical world is to evolve, it must begin with its teachers, with who is allowed to shape young minds, who is trusted with the sacred task of passing on magic. Until Muggleborns are seen not as guests, but as heirs, not as brilliant exceptions, but as rightful mentors, Hogwarts will remain a place of immense knowledge, tragically narrow in voice. And so we return to the silent corridors of Hogwarts. The portraits smile, the staircases shift, but behind the moving walls the faculty remains unchanged. The names on the doors echo with heritage, not inclusion. A school of magic, still reluctant to share the wand of authority with those who came from beyond the veil of magical blood. Number 26. Are Muggleborns treated differently in other countries? In the vast and layered world of wizardry, much attention has been paid to the affairs of Britain, its Hogwarts, its ministry, and its magical crises. But the story of magic does not begin and end with the British Isles. Far beyond the misty Scottish hills where Hogwarts stands lies a broader magical map. Durmstrang in the far north, Beauxbatons nestled in the French Pyrenees, Ilvermorny on the peak of Mount Greylock in Massachusetts, and still others whose names are rarely uttered. And yet, across these institutions, a pressing question arises: what place is afforded to Muggleborns in these hidden sanctuaries of spellwork and tradition? In Britain, the term mudblood is not just a slur, it is a wound deep enough that Hermione Granger, one of the brightest witches of her age, faced shame and near violence simply for her parentage. It means dirty blood. Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who is Muggleborn, she once explained, with a look of quiet fury. And if this is the case in the allegedly progressive British magical society, then what of other nations? Are they more enlightened, or even more entrenched in blood purity? Durmstrang is perhaps the most infamous in this regard. The school is shrouded in secrecy and bound by harsh traditions. Its reputation is cold, both literally and figuratively, nestled somewhere in the far reaches of Northern Europe, possibly Scandinavia or Eastern Europe. Victor Krum, its most renowned student during the Triwizard Tournament, carried with him the weight of a proud but somewhat shadowed heritage. Though the books never directly confirm that Durmstrang bans Muggleborns, Rowling herself hinted at this in an interview, and whispers within the fandom have taken root. The school is known for its emphasis on the dark arts rather than mere defense against them, and many of its alumni, including notorious figures like Gellert Grindelwald, were known proponents of magical superiority. It's a culture that, if it does not outright forbid Muggleborns, certainly discourages them. Beauxbatons, on the other hand, presents a different kind of mystery. While the school carries the grace and elegance of French enchantment, housed in a chateau glittering with charm and crystal, it is not immune to the biases of wizarding society. Fleur Delacour, half Veela and fiercely proud, never once mentions Muggleborns during her time at Hogwarts. There are no known Muggleborn French wizards in canon. But then what is not said often speaks louder than what is. France, with its history of revolution and liberté, may in theory be more accepting, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. In many ways, Beauxbatons is an enigma, presenting a veil of inclusion without ever lifting it fully. Ilvermorny offers perhaps the most hopeful picture, though even it is not free from the complexities of magical identity. The American Wizarding School, founded by Isolde Sayre, a descendant of Salazar Slytherin no less, welcomed all magical children, regardless of blood status. Isolde, having fled the oppressive ideologies of her guardian Gormleth Gaunt, wanted to build a school where bloodline did not determine destiny. The school was founded on values of merit and magical ability, not heritage. In Isolde's own legend, her adopted children were Muggleborns, James and Webster Boot, whom she trained with the same dedication she would any child. This spirit lives on in Ilvermorny's tradition. Unlike Durmstrang or even Hogwarts, Ilvermorny was built on the premise of equality, but even in America the story is not without shadows. The Magical Congress of the United States, MACUSA, once implemented Rappaport's law, which forbade witches and wizards from fraternizing with no-mages, the American term for muggles. Though not directly targeting Muggleborns, the law created a society where revealing one's magical identity could be dangerous, especially for those whose families came from the non-magical world. A Muggleborn wizard in 19th century America would have faced isolation from both worlds. The law was only repealed in 1965, a full century after its enforcement, making one question just how equal Ilvermorny truly was during those decades. And what of Eastern cultures where magic has ancient roots in shamanism, alchemy, and celestial energy? The Japanese school of Mahutakoro is famed for its academic excellence and tradition of flying on the backs of giant storm petrels. Here, robes change color to indicate a student's academic success, and notably, involvement with dark magic turns them white. There is no mention of blood purity policies, and given Japan's deeply rooted respect for discipline and mastery, regardless of origin, it's plausible that Muggleborns might be accepted, though perhaps quietly scrutinized. It is said that Japanese wizarding society prizes contribution above lineage, but little is documented. In Africa, the great school of Ouagadougou stands atop the mountains of the moon and accepts students from across the continent. Known for its prowess in astronomy, alchemy, and self-transfiguration, Ouagadougou operates without wands, favoring hand gestures and mental discipline. Nothing in any public record suggests that Muggleborns are barred. In fact, given the immense diversity of cultures and tribes across Africa and the collaborative way the school operates across regions, inclusion seems not only possible but necessary. J.K. Rowling mentioned that African magic predates wand usage, and is considered deeply spiritual. This connection to the natural world may transcend the artificial divides of blood. One striking tale comes from Brazil, where the school Castelo Bruxo, hidden deep within the Amazon rainforest, trains witches and wizards in herbology and magizoology. While the school itself is shrouded in more mystery than most, there is a sense of harmony with nature and the magical creatures that inhabit the land. A former Castelo Bruxo student named Lucio Duarte, featured in an obscure Pottermore piece, spoke of growing up in a Muggle village and being visited by a magical emissary riding a golden kaipora, a creature native to the Amazon. This emissary saw promise in Lucio and brought him to Castelo Bruxo, where he later became an expert in magical botany. Lucio's story is one of rare recognition, a Muggle-born raised in a rainforest village, elevated through education, not blood. Still, for every Lucio, there may be countless others whose magical talent is either ignored or denied. If wizarding education systems are controlled by narrow hierarchies, how many gifted Muggle-borns never receive their letter? How many are told, directly or subtly, that they do not belong? This is especially poignant when reflecting on the oppressive ideologies of Grindelwald and Voldemort, both of whom sought to purify magic through violence and suppression. Grindelwald's own roots at Durmstrang suggest that educational institutions are not just places of learning, but breeding grounds for ideology. And so we return to Britain, where the scars of this ideology still linger. The very existence of a word like mudblood in school corridors suggests a failure in cultural transformation. Even after Voldemort's defeat, even after Hermione's rise to power in the Ministry, has anything truly changed? In Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Draco Malfoy is still wrestling with old legacies, and Scorpius is judged by the bloodlines of his ancestors. If British magical society cannot break the cycle, how can others be expected to? It is bitterly ironic that Hogwarts, home to Albus Dumbledore, a man who once opposed Grindelwald, a man who stood for love over blood, remained a place where Muggleborns were bullied and belittled. It matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be, Dumbledore once said. But did Hogwarts ever truly embody this belief? Perhaps the most revealing detail lies in the architecture of these schools themselves. Ilvermorny is built atop a mountain, accessible only by those who make the climb. Wagadu appears in dreams to chosen students, often before they even know they have magic. Hogwarts sends a letter, but only if the Ministry's magic-tracking quills happen to notice a child's accidental spell. What if those quills are biased, outdated, or misinformed? What if a Muggle-born performs no visible magic in early childhood because of fear, repression, or circumstances? Then the letter never comes, the path is sealed. In recent years, reformers in the magical world have begun to speak louder. A Brazilian activist named Nadia Figueira published a thesis titled Bloodlines of the Future, arguing for international magical inclusion standards and better Muggle-born outreach. Her paper cites chilling statistics. In some nations, over 40% of magical positions in government are filled by pure bloods, while Muggleborns remain underrepresented. If the magical world truly seeks to reflect the values of equality, then education must be the battleground, not just for policy, but for culture, for recognition, and for celebration of diverse origins. A child born to Muggle parents in Kenya should have the same chance to become a great alchemist as one born to a magical dynasty in Paris. Magic, by its very nature, is unpredictable and wild. Trying to constrain it within bloodlines is not just foolish, it's dangerous. For now, the stories of Muggle-born witches and wizards across the world remain fractured and half-told. A few, like Hermione Granger or Lucio Duarte, manage to rise through brilliance and tenacity, but countless others are left out of the narrative. It is time the magical world opened its doors wider and listened. Number 27. Why don't Muggle-borns have representation? In the great halls of wizarding history, every magical creature and outcast group seems to have etched its presence onto the political tapestry of the wizarding world, except one. The Muggleborns, born of non-magical parents, stand as anomalies in a realm that often values blood over ability. And yet, despite their unique position, they remain without a voice, without a banner, without a seat at any table of power. It is not merely a bureaucratic oversight. It is a silence so loud it threatens to rewrite the narrative of equality itself. Consider the goblins, not human, not wizard, and certainly not treated as equals. But they have Gringotts, a fortress of stone and gold that does more than guard treasure. It defends goblin pride. Their conflicts with wizards are well documented, from rebellions to quiet standoffs, and their political leverage, while unofficial, is undeniable. Ragnok, a prominent goblin figure, once warned of the thievery of goblin-made artifacts by human hands. Whether one agrees or not, the very presence of such a voice means something. Then we have the house elves, those quiet, tireless beings who for centuries were chained not just by magic, but by expectations. And yet, through Hermione Granger's Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, SPEW, even they found a flicker of representation. SPEW may have been mocked in its time. Hermione was waving her hand so vigorously that it was actually beating the air. But its symbolic value cannot be denied. Hermione, a Muggleborn herself, saw injustice in another's plight and moved to action. Ironically, she never launched a campaign for her own people. Werewolves, feared, reviled, and isolated. But their status at least was codified. Laws were made, rules were crafted. Dolores Umbridge, drenched in condescension, once issued a decree that restricted werewolf employment, targeting Remus Lupin himself. It was cruel, yes, but it acknowledged their distinct needs, their difference, their societal position. Even in discrimination, there is an unspoken recognition. The giants, dwindling in number, still echo through the political halls of memory. Hagrid's mission to parley with them, Dumbledore's desperate diplomacy, these are signs that their existence merited political thought. Vampires too, though shrouded in myth and fear, are mentioned in ministry registries and afforded cautious attention. So what of the Muggleborns? They are the strange middle, wizards by power, but Muggles by birth. They do not fit in either world, and perhaps that is the source of the discomfort. As Dumbledore once said, you place too much importance, and you always have done, on the so-called purity of blood. You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. A noble sentiment, yet even Dumbledore, as far as records show, never convened a council of Muggle-born students. He mentored, yes, protected, certainly. But a structure, a voice? Nothing. Let us look at the numbers. Every year, Hogwarts admits a new crop of students. Among them, several are Muggleborn: Hermione Granger, Lily Evans, Colin Creevey, Justin Finch-Fletchley. They are not few, and yet they move through the system like guests, never settlers. They assimilate, they adapt, but they are never asked, "What do you need? How can we help you understand this world into which you have been flung?" The Sorting Hat once said, "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see." It speaks of choices, of inner truths, but Muggleborns arrive at Hogwarts with no generational wisdom to guide them, no family knowledge of wand lore, magical etiquette, or the hidden rules of bloodlines. They are dropped into a world that sees them as curious, even suspect. And they survive. But survival is not the same as belonging. We must revisit the first year of Harry Potter himself. Though technically a half-blood, raised in a Muggle home, he faced many of the same confusions as his Muggle-born peers. He had no idea what a remembrall was, or the significance of the name Malfoy. He didn't know why mudblood was a slur until Hermione was attacked with the word. And no system at Hogwarts prepared him or her for that cruelty. It was Ron Weasley, not a teacher, who explained the term's ugliness. Dirty blood, see? Common term for someone like Hermione. Should this not have been addressed formally, institutionally? The lack of representation becomes clearer when we examine the Hogwarts curriculum. There are no orientation sessions for Muggleborns, no support systems for cultural translation, no advisory boards to field their concerns. When Hermione's parents visited Diagon Alley, they were observers, not participants. Muggleborns are encouraged to leave their world behind, not merge it with magic. They are expected to become something new and quickly, or risk being left behind. This erasure is subtle but devastating. The moment they enter Hogwarts, Muggleborns begin to lose their past. Their understanding of their own world is now less than, and the new world provides no anchor. They are alone in transition. Lily Evans, one of the most powerful witches of her generation, had to navigate these waters with no institutional aid. Severus Snape, obsessed with bloodlines and his own half-blood status, turned on her when she resisted that ideology. And when she died, the community mourned her as a war hero, but not as a Muggle-born woman who had risen without a scaffold. Some may argue that the very idea of giving Muggleborns a separate representation is divisive, that they are wizards like any other, sorted into houses, given the same wands, taught the same spells, but equality is not sameness, and in this case, ignoring difference becomes a form of quiet oppression. The Ministry of Magic, in all its bureaucratic grandeur, has departments for magical law enforcement, magical accidents, magical games and sports, even the misuse of Muggle artifacts. But where is the department for Muggle-born integration? During Voldemort's reign, a blood status registry was created to persecute them, and when the war ended, that apparatus was dismantled. But was anything built in its place? No Muggle-born was appointed to speak for their group in post-war reform councils. Kingsley Shacklebolt, a noble leader, did much to stabilize the wizarding world, but his administration made no mention of a new council, no task force, no public record of Muggle-born representation. And so, the silence returned. Hermione Granger, Minister for Magic in later years, may have remembered the sting of her early years, but by then the system had already trained her to look outward, not inward. Perhaps the lack of representation comes from fear. Fear that giving Muggleborns a voice will fracture the unity of the wizarding world. But that unity is a fragile illusion if it depends on silence. When the wizarding world allows goblins to own vaults but not wands, when it lets centaurs live in forests but not speak in courts, it reveals a pattern. Power is rationed carefully and only to those deemed safe. Muggleborns, unpredictable and unanchored, are simply not trusted. And yet they have saved the world more times than anyone else. Lily Evans, through her sacrifice, protected the boy who lived. Hermione Granger, with her intellect and ferocity, unravelled centuries of magical theory in her teens. Colin Creevey, though dismissed as a child with a camera, died fighting in the Battle of Hogwarts. They bled for this world. And still it does not give them a seat. The tragedy deepens when we realize how easily representation could be implemented. A Muggle-born student council, a cultural liaison office at the ministry, a mentorship program pairing Muggle-borns with experienced alumni. These are not revolutions, they are basic acknowledgements, and yet none of them exist. We must ask ourselves, is the wizarding world truly inclusive or merely tolerant? Inclusion means empowerment. Tolerance means endurance. Right now, Muggle-borns endure. They do not lead. And this is not because they cannot. It is because they are not invited to. Even the Hogwarts Library, a treasure trove of ancient magic, has no section on Muggle-born history. There is no account of their arrival, their integration, their struggle. Their stories are scattered, remembered only when they become exceptional. But representation is not about the exceptional, it is about the ordinary. And ordinary Muggle-borns are disappearing from the narrative. There is still time to change this, but change begins with recognition. The next Minister for Magic must not only speak of blood purity in abstract terms, they must act. The next headmaster of Hogwarts must not only welcome new students, they must prepare them. And every wizarding family must understand that Muggle-borns are not guests at a magical feast, they are co-builders of the world.